building organization capacity, and fostering external partnerships. Leveraging her experience in health leadership and project management, Tamika also serves as clinical lead for the center's COVID-19 pandemic response, which includes testing, immunization, health education, digital health, and patient safety initiatives. With a career as a community dietitian spanning over 14 years, Tamika continues to provide counseling on a wide range of diet-related conditions, plan and deliver evidence-based programs, and work with various community agencies to address food insecurity. Tamika obtained her Bachelor of Science in Nutrition and Food at Ryerson University and holds a graduate degree in Health Sciences from the University of Toronto. She is a member of the College of Dietitians of Ontario, Community Health Centre Dietitian Action Group, and sits on the board of the Primary Care Dietitian Association. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Tamika Shah.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I do see some familiar faces on here, so good to see everyone. Yes, hi, Ken, I see you. Hi, Anthony. But thank you for inviting me. Such an important topic, and I am so happy that there is actually a routine meeting or a place for men to meet and to discuss issues that are relevant to the community. And also happy that despite the pandemic, you're finding other ways to meet and meeting in a virtual context. So I am going to share my screen. I believe I heard that people were invited to use the chat to communicate or to ask questions. I'm also open to accepting questions after, but we'll go with the chair as to what's preferred. But at any point, anything that's not covered, or if you feel like you need any additional clarification, please feel free to ask me in whatever way is comfortable for you.
Yeah, people can either raise their hands.
Okay.
Then we'll unmute them and they can ask.
Okay. And of course, because it's technology, if there are any issues with sound or seeing my screen, please don't hesitate to interrupt me and let me know. All right. And because I'm sharing my screen, I actually can't see anyone. So if you see me looking all over the place or just not really staring or focusing, it's because I can't see anyone. But again, our topic today, diet and cancer prevention. And I believe the first time I spoke on this topic would have been around 2012. Olive Branch of Hope had their, I believe it was their symposium, and they invited me to speak. And so that 2012 advice continues to shift as evidence, more evidence becomes available. Some things are not as strong, or some things become even more supported. So I'm going to be going over updated evidence since 2017 or since that point. So in terms of my outline, I am going over anything that contributes to cancer risk, but I'm also going to be looking at factors that decrease risk. Now, at the end of the day, yes, this is evidence and it's science, but we would want to know how to actually put that in place in our daily lives. Like, how can we make this practical and something that I can actually follow, so that when you leave here, you can have a few goals in mind, as in, you know what, I'm doing this, I'm going to continue doing it, or I have not been doing this. So how can I implement something that Tamika has suggested? So we'll review some strategies for improving food intake. I'm going to briefly look at a quick video that shows how to make over a traditional recipe, and then also do some discussion on how to make over your plate. So then you can actually leave with some visual practical advice as to how to put any of these recommendations into place. So again, as an overview, we all know that cancer is multifactorial, right? The reason for development, many different reasons. Sometimes we don't really know what it is. We do know that diet and physical activity can contribute to about 40% of those cases. but not necessarily so. Sometimes it is inherited, genetic reasons. Sometimes we have environmental exposure without knowing that we're being exposed. Sometimes there are effects in the body itself in terms of either metabolic processes or related to inflammation or hormones, viral infections. It could be many varied reasons. And so for this reason, my talk is really just how to reduce risk and optimize nutrition, but not necessarily saying that there won't ever be causation, right? It's just how can we live a healthy life with prevention. And I'm not focusing on eating for after diagnosis. That would be a separate discussion. After diagnosis, sometimes the strategies change because it's usually dependent on an individual approach, right? So for this purposes, most of the advice in here is healthy eating. It's applicable to a lot of other chronic disease prevention or chronic disease management, but sometimes after a cancer diagnosis, the advice may change. So I just wanted to note that difference. All right, so again, much of my information, it's going to be based on the American Institute of Cancer Research and the World Cancer Research Fund, which it's a collaborative, but they publish ongoing updates maybe every 10 years or so, right? So the information is continuously being reviewed and updated through an initiative called the Continuous Update Project. So the Continuous Update Project will analyze research. You're looking at different types of research and then putting it all together based on how strong evidences are. You can't really see my chart very clearly because it's so much information. And I believe it's a 1,200-page document. But if you look at the chart to your top, I think for you should be on your top right. The blue boxes indicate that there's a strong evidence for decreased risk for any of these items that's in my little bubble. So in the bubble, again, it's not meant for you to read it clearly because I'm going to go through like almost like a zoom in version on my next slides. But each of the item in my bubble is an item that's being studied. And those things could include anything from physical activity to certain types of fruits, certain types of vegetables, or it could be a nutrient that's being studied, it could be a lifestyle factor that's being studied. So within that bubble are different items or different behaviors, if you use the term health behaviors, or different ingredients or foods, different nutrients. And then to your far right, those bars, the blue bars, red bars, some look white, maybe pink, that now would show you what evidence there is. So anything that's listed in a blue usually means there's strong evidence for a reduced risk. Anything that's listed in a red means that there's a strong evidence for increasing the risk. Anything that's white means that previously they thought there was some sort of an association, but ongoing research is showing that there really isn't. So two of those white bars would be, for example, coffee or caffeine. And another one would be salt. So salt by itself or caffeine by itself or caffeine in coffee, chocolate, those were ruled out to not really having any kind of an association. So in more detail, I've taken now some of the ones with the strong evidence. That's going to be on this slide as well as my next slide. So these are factors that were shown to increase risk. Excess body fat over time, especially weight gain in adulthood, linked to several types of cancers, I believe about 12 different types. And it was through various effects, either from hormone production, so something like insulin, which is a hormone, as we know, that helps in sugar regulation, that can promote growth. Leptin is another hormone that has links to our appetite. And I'm missing one. Oh, cytokines. So cytokines, which is something that's linked, it's produced by fat tissue in the body, but it's linked to inflammation. So it's not an inflammation where you actually feel ill. It's ongoing, low grade. You don't really know that it's happening. And those have been linked to promoting growth of cancer cells. Red meat and processed meats, as we know. Red meat, will sometimes give direction to say increase your red meat intake if your iron is low. But we always want to say too much of one thing is never really good. So it's the high amounts of red meat or high amounts of processed meats. They contain something called heme iron, or they can contain something called nitrates. And so in your stomach with digestion, those foods can cause development of carcinogenic agents. So carcinogenic would mean cancer causing. So they can develop cancer causing agents within the gut, and that leads to an increased risk in either colorectal cancers or gastric cancers. I Excessive alcohol intake would be the third that I'm listing here. It's actually graded as a carcinogen. And again, I used the definition for carcinogen as in cancer-causing agent. And it's linked to several types of cancers from like mouth, throat, esophageal, so basically oral cancers. Salted and preserved foods. I really want to highlight this because this can be a big thing for our community. So the recipe I am going to show gives a version that, omits two of the typical, I'm going to say, salted foods that we tend to use in cooking, which could be salt beef or pig stale. These foods are cured and they can be cured with an item called sodium nitrite. So nitrites within the body, they convert, with digestion again, they convert to another cancer-causing agent. Diet low in plant-based foods. And the link from that comes with the idea that if you're having a lot of a low intake of plant-based foods, which basically means, refined or processed carbohydrates, as an example, the chances are that you have a low fiber intake. So a diet that's high in dietary fiber has association to lower cancer risk, particularly colorectal cancer risk. And then there's low level of physical activity. Not really sure if it's the physical activity itself that contributes to it or the fact that it helps with maintaining a healthy weight. And that would link back to my first point where, having a healthy weight reduces your risk. Now let's talk about the good stuff. So the nutrition related factors that decrease your risk that you want to do more of, or you want to have it in place on a daily basis. Before, the advice used to be very focused on individual foods, individual nutrients, and their effect. The more updated guidance, it's more about healthy eating patterns. But I still wanted to highlight some of the foods that were studied and have been studied, because I feel it's helpful to know like groups of foods and where our traditional foods can fit, right? So fruits and vegetables in general, across the board, because they're higher fiber, as I mentioned, or they have phytonutrients. Tomato products is a big one that used to be studied. It's not listed in the newer guidelines as an individual item, but we know that it contains lycopene, which is an antioxidant that is related to prostate cancer health. And particularly cooked tomato products, so adding tomatoes into cooking increases the lycopene content. So, where we might stir fry garlic and onion and add some tomatoes in, add some peppers in, that's usually a good habit to have and to continue with your cooking. Not only does it add flavor, but you're also adding antioxidants in cooking. The onion and garlic that I mentioned before, they're considered allium vegetables, and those have also been studied for their many benefits. Vegetables that we tend to have in our diet, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage especially, all the greens. I know callaloo was not listed as a specific green, but as long as people start to list things like your collard greens and your kale, for me, I would include callaloo in that because it is a leafy green. So I would include any of the greens that we tend to eat in this group as having strong links to prevention, and not just cancer, again, like I've mentioned, heart health and so many other chronic disease management, cholesterol levels, diabetes, in terms of managing blood sugar levels, having adequate amount of vegetables daily and non-starchy vegetables have been very beneficial. I've highlighted the line. If you look at the second from the last line where I say whole grains and foods containing fiber, the research and the evidence says whole grains and foods containing fiber help with reduced risk. And this particular collaborative that, they're doing their ongoing research and reviews and, they're meeting as a panel and putting out these recommendations. They're looking supposedly at global research. However, we know that sometimes our traditional foods can be understudied because there is inequity in research. So inequity in research basically means wherever the funding is, wherever the money is, it goes into research. And so there's a lot more evidence, and we will say evidence-based nutrition. And an example would be the Mediterranean diet, which it is a great diet. It has been studied widely. It's basically one of the gold standards that we would use in our dietetic practice. And certainly in our primary care practice, we use the Mediterranean diet. But at the same time, it's not the only diet or dietary pattern because it's evidence-based, because a lot of money went into researching that. But when I look at the similarities between that Mediterranean diet and our traditional Caribbean diet. Very similar, right? Fish, fruits, vegetables, your roots and your tubers. So potatoes, for example, or sweet potato or yams. To me, a sweet potato, a yam, or starchy fruits like or a green banana, similar in terms of nutrition profile to what's included in that diet. The leafy greens, your nuts and seeds, beans. I mean, we cook with beans often, right? Stewed peas or curry chickpeas or dal or having beans in our soups. So all those to me are very similar. And in that context, we know that our foods then from a traditional basis will also have health benefits. It's just not as widely studied and therefore not included in this global nutrition or global body of nutrition. And that's why I always want to try to say we can stay on the traditional course. It's more sustainable if you're actually cooking foods that you're used to, foods that, you know, through nostalgia we've kind of grown up with, or just anything that I know that we love, right? There's no reason to give up foods that you love and you enjoy because there is a diet, and I use the word diet in quotation marks, because there is a diet that was highly studied and somebody said, this is the way that I must eat. Now, can some of our traditional diets have changes? For sure. And again, that's where the future slides will show the tweaks that I would usually recommend without having to give up too much of what we're used to. So more detail, again, into the foods that tend to decrease cancer risk. So variety of fruits and vegetables, again, because of their high fiber content or because of their what we call phytonutrients or antioxidant content. So vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin E, these all have links to reducing lung, stomach, colon, or colorectal cancers. Tomato products I mentioned before because of the links to prostate cancer prevention. Cruciferous vegetables I also went into, but there are strong links for colon, lung, and prostate cancer prevention. Varying results, of course, right? Like there are some things that will show really strong association and some that show a probable association. But again, for me, looking at overall big picture and healthy eating, I would still include these foods on a regular basis. The garlic and the onion I've mentioned, links to reduced risk of stomach cancer, include these. And then there are also links to other gut health benefits because they contain something called a prebiotic fiber. So a prebiotic fiber, it feeds your gut bacteria, right? So, or your good bacteria. And so because of that, there are many benefits in terms of soluble fiber and gut health in general. I think the only time I would not recommend too much garlic onion leeks, and it's a separate topic, would be for some people who tend to get chronically bloated, chronic bloating or just chronic cramping without knowing the source of it. That prebiotic fiber for some people is not digestible and people can ferment. The gut bacteria can ferment, which means that it's producing gas, so that can lead to the bloating. I believe that's the only time I usually tell people, try to minimize your garlic onion or leeks. Citrus fruits we talked about because technically it's in the fruits and vegetables and it's because of that high vitamin C content. So the newer advice, and that's where I want to get to, is instead of focusing on individual foods, you know, should I eat more citrus fruits? Should I eat a lot of tomatoes? Should I eat, you know, a lot of garlic and onion in my foods? I really want to focus more on the overall eating, overall patterns, overall daily habits. And it's just saying, okay, one step at a time, what can I start to add in, right? It's not going to the store and buying a supplement, because supplements are not really good quick fixes at times. And depending on the source of the supplement, you can always have or be ingesting something that you're not really sure would be in it, right? There's upper levels of toxicity from having excessive amounts. So sometimes a supplement is not always the fix. It's looking at your overall foods, because foods sometimes have all these other compounds in it that have so many other benefits. And it's not the individual nutrient that is actually causing the effect. We just haven't been able to tease out what the effect of that food is. So overall eating patterns and daily habits is usually what I suggest. So one of those overall eating habits and patterns is from this organization called Old Ways. And they have developed this African heritage diet pyramid, which I like. It's African heritage, which means it's showing foods to me that represent culture, represent or traditional cooking or traditional foods, if you will. And so I always mention our foods start out being very healthy. Where we tend to go off track is probably in the preparation, right? So instead of boiling something or baking something, we might choose to fry or deep fry, or we might choose to refine it very much more. So like rice, as an example, you know, you're going from a brown rice to a white rice, then you're looking at ultra refined. Maybe adding sugars to things, right? So if we're making a porridge like a oats or a cornmeal porridge, but then we end up adding your condensed milk, your, you know, brown sugar sure is healthier than white sugar, but at the same time, it is still a sugar. So adding sugars to foods, that's where we start to get off track. The added sugar, the added fats, added salts. And I know salt adds flavor, but adding too much salt, then you're elevating your risk. The portions, that might be another thing. So I like the pyramid because it's a demonstration of where emphasis should be. So underpinning everything, yes, would be your physical activity. It would be having social support and connections, having interactions. So, you know, through your family or your friends, through your church networks, through groups such as these, that's where people tend to build connections, and people with connections tend to be more emotionally supported and to be more readily inclined to make healthy changes. You know, if you call a friend up and say, let's go for a walk, you're more likely to go for a walk than to go by yourself, right? I know that not everybody has those social supports. So for sure, if you know of people like that, reach out, connect them. So many people could probably benefit from a group like this and from hearing information and connecting in this kind of setting. So reach out and share and make your connections. Your second part of the pyramid would be the emphasis on greens, leafy green vegetables, and across the board vegetables. Next up, you would have your fruits. You have other types of vegetables. And in your little corner, because our yams, potatoes, what else am I thinking of? Dashi, cassava, those are considered vegetables. They're not in this bigger bar because of the higher starch content. So yes, you want to include them because of their fiber content, and some of them will have your carotenoids and antioxidants that I mentioned, but you would want to watch the portions. So that's where I say our food will fit into any healthy eating pattern, but preparation and portions are the two things that might throw us off track. And if we continue up, using your herbs, your spices, your traditional sauces to flavor your meals, and trying to use that more than salt or seasonings that have salt, that's usually one healthy step to take. Adding in your beans as a plant-based source, and using a lot more beans and plant-based protein to replace your animal protein. Fish and seafood is always going to be somewhat leaner protein choice, and because of that, we do recommend it more, especially if you do fatty fish with the omega-3 content, so your mackerel, your salmon, your sardines. We would recommend that a lot more than the red meat. And of course, you keep going up, and sweets, you know, would be on the list, but occasionally. And then on the side, you're having a lot more water. So less sugary drinks, less sweetened beverages and pop. If you're drinking coffee or tea, less honey and sugar in those coffee and teas. Now, I went through that really fast, but I just wanted to again highlight is that there's a plant-based emphasis. So vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, or beans and lentils, whole grains, roots, tubers, and starchy fruits. So starchy fruits, when I say starchy fruits, I'm referring to banana, plantain, breadfruit. Okay, I tried to make this a little bit bigger so we could all see it. Now, steps you can take. How can you actually implement any of this advice? Reducing your intake of salted and preserved foods. Reflect on how your cooking practices are. What do you tend to cook with, or what do you tend to have regularly? You know, is there ham, bacon, salted deli foods? Would you have the salt mackerel or the salt beef, the pig's tail? If those are in your diet and on a regular basis, meaning weekly, then you start to limit or reduce. But first you need to figure out, am I even having these, and how can you make that switch, or how can you make that change? Assess your intake again of red meats. How often do you have red meats? Is it more than occasionally? And when you do have red meat, is it a large size, right? Is it an 8-ounce steak, a 12-ounce steak? Assess that amount. Are you having goat very regularly, or oxtail, or, you know, beef? How often? And then see if you can reduce that amount. The idea would be to try to limit or omit, right? Alcoholic beverages, again, start out by reflecting on how much you drink. Some alcohol is reasonable, and some people like it in a social setting. Of course, it would have a place if that's one of the things that will bring people together, but always see what or how much do you drink, or what triggers drinking. And if you find with assessment that you're drinking an equivalent, if you're a male, you're drinking an equivalent of about 14 drinks per week, which would be, like a bottle of beer, 5 ounces of wine, or I believe it's 1 ounce of like hard liquor. If you're drinking about 14 of those or more than that, then start to think, how can I cut back? What support systems would you need to cut back? See what triggers it. I know there are people who will not take a drink, but then if at a barbecue they might, that would be slightly different. For women, drinking no more than 1 drink daily, or the equivalent of 7 drinks. And the big thing would be limiting or refined carbohydrates. So refined means that they're really processed. So anything instant or refined, white flour, white rice, cereal that's really refined, instant oats, even cornmeal can be refined. You can find whole grain cornmeal, but sometimes it's rare. But looking for whole grain cornmeal if you can, and if you can't, then how can you add back some fiber when you're cooking? Adding sugars, again, I mentioned very quickly, brown sugar or raw sugar seems to be healthier, but at the same time, it is still sugar. And when your body takes it in, it will metabolize and process it like a sugar. Honey is the same. It's a natural sugar, but it is still sugar. So adding honey, white sugar, cane sugar, all those sugars, your body will still see it as such. So you still want to be aware. It's not saying that you should never have it, just more being aware of how much you're having and where it's coming from and how much compared to recommendations. So in terms of the specific steps now, you might want to pick one of these and then say, let me commit to a goal. So for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to have more plant-based foods. So number 1 is choosing a healthy diet that is based on a variety of plant sources. How can I do that? Adding in more fruits or vegetables, replacing a meat dish with a plant-based protein dish once in a while. So if you were likely to have a stewed peas or like a soup, then can you replace the meat or the chicken in the soup with a plant-based protein type? So like a split pea or like lentil, white kidney beans, red kidney beans. How can you replace those or those meats or animal protein with a vegetable protein? Fruits, if you tend not to have fruits daily, then you want to start having 2 to 4 fruits in a day. And this, I am saying, dependent on appetite, which you'll see later on. I do talk about like a mindful approach, which your appetite would then be, am I hungry? Am I full? It's not eating 4 fruits because Tamika said eat 4 fruits. It's eating fruits if you're hungry, right? So you're listening still to your inner body and your cues. So anywhere from 2 to 4 fruits on a daily basis. And you can eat a variety as long as they're whole fruits. I'll hear people say, oh, but I put them into a juice or I put them into a smoothie. I am okay with a smoothie and you juicing the fruits from time to time. The catch is with juicing, if you have a juicer that takes away all the trash or what looks like trash, that trash is fiber. So you're lowering the fiber content. If you're doing a smoothie and you strain it, it's the same thing. If it's a smoothie and you're putting like too much fruits in it, then you're having all the fruits in one sitting. So I usually say no more than 2 fruits or 2 types of fruits if you're making a smoothie or a blend. There's a question in the chat, so I'm just gonna pause for a minute. Oh, I've never heard of whole grain cornmeal. Yeah, it's hard to find, but there's a brand called Bob's Red Mill. I'm not sure if you've ever seen it. Sometimes Superstore or Loblaws, Walmart even will carry it. So Bob's Red Mill will make a whole grain cornmeal. You might have to look in the natural foods or what do they call that section? Like natural foods or there's a section usually in those stores that tend to have like the gluten-free and organic and all those things. Just bypass all those names, but usually the Bob's Red Mill might be in that section. There's another one. Is low-carb food helpful? So low-carb, Low carb in my in my context can take many different forms, so I'm going to say it depends. There is really low carb, which is less than 5%, and if you hear about the keto diet, for example, that's a really low carb diet. There's low carb / moderate carb, which is what I might recommend, in the sense of it would make up about 40% of your daily intake. And I'm saying percentages, but what I really mean is on your plate, and later on I'm showing up a plate method. Following that plate method would help you in that low moderate carb approach. The reason I do that is your brain functions off of glucose, right? And so for people who might have really, really low carbohydrate intake, they can experience irritability or mood changes. So I do recommend some carbohydrate. If someone is working out or doing any kind of exercise, a bit of carbohydrate also helps with energy, right? So I do say low carb in the sense of you can allow yourself to have 1 or 2 servings in your meal, but an ultra low carb, sometimes not as sustainable. And it's worse for somebody to start something that is not sustainable. They do it for 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, and then switching back to regular eating, it's actually worse for your body. You can either get into a binge restrict. So binge restrict is where you're restricting certain foods that you really enjoy, and then you end up binging on those foods. And you can also get into what's called weight cycling. So you're losing weight, gaining weight, losing weight, gaining weight. It's actually bad for your body metabolically. So having a lower carbohydrate, or that's not low carb, allows you to have some foods that you enjoy. So if you wanted that slice of bread, or if you wanted that dumpling, or like a spoon of that rice and peas, you're still having it. So you're not feeling totally restricted and totally as if, you're just cutting out all the foods that you enjoy. All right, I see 3 more questions. I'm just going to go back up. So I did the low carb. Somebody has organic, but I'm not sure what the question is. Is it a question? Oh, you were telling me which section to find it. Probably telling me which section to find it. I believe that might be referring to like when I was saying which sections in the grocery store. And then is low carb.
You want me to help you by reading out the questions?
Do you want to help me? Sure, help me out. So I'm at the point where it says, should you eat fruits any particular time of day?
Yeah.
So I'll answer that one. All right. And then afterwards you can do the rest. So should I eat fruits any particular time of day? I don't subscribe to that, again, because it's going to be like a rule. It becomes one of those other rules that, you should only eat fruits in the morning. And once you've eaten fruits, you should never eat anything else. Sometimes that's just never realistic for people. So I don't subscribe to that advice. I know there are I've seen books about it. I've heard that as one of those things, but for me personally, I don't recommend. I feel you can eat fruits at any point.
Okay. What do you think of agave as a sweetener?
Yeah, so agave is it's what I call a low glycemic sweetener. So glycemic is another word for sugar, or how something affects your blood sugar. So agave is a low glycemic sugar, and yes, you can certainly use agave instead of white sugar, because it's going to raise your blood sugar levels less.
Okay, so we'll do this question, and then we'll wait until the end.
Okay.
How would using sweeteners in place of sugar fit into a healthy diet?
So sweeteners, I'm going to assume this means the non-nutritive sweetener. So something like a Splenda or Sweet and Low. I'm probably equal. I assume that this is what the question is. So sweeteners, I say they have a place, but I don't like overusing them. So if you have to use more than 2 sweeteners in a day, then look at what else you're eating, why you would need 2 sweeteners in a day. More than 2 sweeteners. Maximum 2 sweeteners is what I would say.
Okay, so let's leave the rest questions until after.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. That was good engagement. Sometimes it's hard when it's like we're not in the same place. Is it just me talking? So thank you. Yeah. All right. I forgot where I got to though, but 2 to 4 fruits. And I say depending on appetite and other diet goals. 4 plus, my plus just means you can eat as many as you want. But if you were going to look at like a number or a goal for in your day, then you would aim for about 4 servings. And on your plate, then if you were to have half of your plate as a serving, then you can assume that to be 2 servings of vegetables. So if half of your plate would be non-starchy vegetables, so non-starchy vegetables are pretty much vegetables that are above the ground, like loosely, the definition would be anything above the ground. Although in this case, it does include carrots for me. But anything above the ground that's considered non-starchy vegetables, and you can have as much as you want. So general guideline then is, if you're into a routine, so morning, breakfast, breakfast, lunch, dinner, then your lunch and your dinner plate, as an example, could have half of your servings. If you're inclined to having vegetables at breakfast, let's say vegetables in an omelet, that counts. Vegetables in a smoothie, that would count. If you're feeling like a steamed callaloo or cabbage or a bok choy kind of morning, that would also count. But you can have as much as you want. Replacing meat and poultry with plant protein. So I mentioned that before. I'm just repeating it again, and you'll see it in my video because this is something that I really emphasize. It doesn't mean that you have to be vegan or vegetarian, but there are lots of, again, the evidence-based type research where people who tend to have a lot more plant-based proteins or a lot more plant-based foods tend to have less risk of chronic disease, or they tend to live longer without developing chronic diseases. There is I don't want to call it a diet, but there is a research on these areas called the blue zones, and there are 5 blue zones in the world. The only blue zone that is in North America is this area called Loma Linda. So Loma Linda is in California, and in that particular area, what I guess the common piece is, lots of Seventh-day Adventists are in that area. So as a religion, most Seventh-day Adventists, not all, tend to be vegetarians. And so that area is considered a blue zone amongst the other 4 blue zones that tend to exist, usually more Mediterranean type areas. And one of the common links is that they're either plant-based, so heavily plant-based, or they're vegetarian diets. Now, choosing whole grains, and I mentioned the roots and the tubers and our starchy fruits, but choosing those that are more processed. Oh, sorry, this is wrong. This should say choosing those foods that are, oh, no, it's correct. It's the way I'm reading it. So you want to choose those more instead of or in place of processed and refined grains. So you're choosing these in place of or instead of. Now, the way that they're prepared, I mentioned, so fried plantain would be a rare thing, right? But boiled plantain would be fine. Fried breadfruit, also rare. That for me would be your special occasion, once in a while type food. You're mostly going to be steaming or baking or boiling. And then lastly would be including an element of mindfulness. And so mindfulness, I'm happy to see, of course, that piece is being talked about today. I won't go into too much detail because I'm also just now integrating this concept into my practice, or I shouldn't say just, in the last few years, integrating it into practice. And I find it's helpful because it helps you support your healthy choices, right? Like sometimes we all come with good intentions. We want to eat well, we want to exercise, we want to get sleep, we want to do all these things, but life happens. And because life happens and we're constantly subjected to daily stress and stressors, if we don't feel like we have the capacity to support the healthy choices, then, it seems like we're failing. So adding that element of mindfulness will definitely be supportive. All right, so what is healthy eating then, right? And how do you also integrate the rest of what I said? It's not a bunch of food rules of do not eat this, don't eat this. Notice I use the words like limit, right? Or eat rarely. So it doesn't really mean that you're completely restricting. It also doesn't mean that you're binge eating and eating whatever because, I can't do this. I want you to pick one small thing or one small change and you work at it for a while, right? Things take repetition to become a habit. So pick small things, small steps, and then say, how can I make that change? And yes, in the end, our attempt is to get to what's considered a healthy and balanced diet. So, having a plate that has half your vegetables on it, doing meal planning where the first thing you're thinking of, what vegetables am I going to cook? What's my side dish, right? What protein? The same way we think about making, let's make curry and rice or curry and roti or whatever it is that we make. I wanted to start thinking right away, what's my vegetable side dish going to be? Again, I integrated this slide because I like it. It's a way for us to reflect and to think and to just start to be aware of our bodies. Some of the practices that we have is eating on the run, eating while being distracted. We're always on the go. The Canadian lifestyle probably contributes to that in some sense. Stress will contribute to that again in some sense. But it's a way for us to start to slow down and to start thinking. So a part of making changes is really awareness. We could be doing the same thing over and over and over and not really realize there is a risk to this. We're doing it, and we're doing it because it's habit. We're doing it because we grew up with it. That's what we saw our parents, grandparents, all our forefathers do. We're doing it because it's easy. And sometimes we're not aware that that thing or that habit is contributing to certain risk. And I find it helpful then to say, okay, let's step back, reflect. Let's start with the awareness. And then when you're aware, you can say, okay, what can I change? Do I have the capacity or the ability to change? Do I have the support? Do I have the resources? As an example, food security was mentioned in in my introduction. It's because I'm a dietitian and I'm telling people, this is how you need to eat and how you need to include these foods. But if people don't have food, then how can they make those changes? If they don't have if they're of a low income background and they don't have the financial resources after paying, like, your rent and doing all those things, how can they? When I speak to families and moms or dads will say, oh no, I only ate once for the day. But then you find out deeper, they're eating once for the day because they need their kids to have meals. They're skimping on things so that their kids can have foods for lunch. So it became a big part of my work, because then in that case, people have no capacity. All right. So mindfulness in this context, I kind of went off on a tangent there, but mindfulness in this aspect, it's asking yourself, why do I eat? And main reason we should be eating is physical hunger, right? Tummy rumbling, maybe feeling a little lightheaded. We should never really get to that point where we're starving and we're feeling that lightheadedness, but that's one of the reasons why that would indicate that we're physically hungry. So we're eating because we're physically hungry. When do you eat? There is no prescriptive time per se, but you're eating when you're hungry. And then ask yourself, what do you eat? Right? What are you choosing at that point? And that's when you start to look at, are my foods nourishing, right? Are my foods beneficial to my body? Like, what is it contributing to me? Do I feel good when I eat? Do I feel guilty when I eat, or do I feel good? Do I feel like I actually did something good for my body? And then how do you eat? Is it fast? Is it in a rush? Are you grabbing? Are you just running in from work, for example, or coming in from church, or going long days? How do you eat? Are you actually slowing down, tasting, enjoying your food? And then how much do you eat? Then you start to get into the quantity. Are you eating until you're so full? Something that tastes really, really good can lead us to eat until we're really, really full. So, and to the point where we actually keep going, right? So how much do you eat? That's when you start to feel, am I hungry or am I full now? Do I feel satisfied? All right, I do want to show this video. So Okay, so traditionally, some of the stew peas or soups, we know they can be made with the salted beef and the pig's tail. This recipe that I just showed, it's omitting meat, right? Peas and beans themselves are actually a really good source of protein. And the bonus is that they're also a good source of fiber. So then you get two of your bonus nutrients that tend to be good for good health. If you're finding that you still need a little piece of it because that's what you're used to, then start to use less, start to reduce. And then another alternative is switching out the salted ones. That way you're not ingesting the nitrates or the nitrites that I mentioned, but you start to reduce your salted beef. So you might use fresh beef as an example for in place of your salt beef or your pig's tail. Okay, and then I am looking at the plate makeover. Again, because people will say, well, how do I integrate that? So with the meal planning piece and when you're deciding what to cook for dinner or what you're doing for the rest of the week, heavy emphasis on your fruits and your vegetables. So you're looking at your first plate that I call the unbalanced plate, roti, white rice. But then how do you make it over where you're not restricting, and at the end of it, you will still feel full? Well, it's adding in those vegetables that are very high fiber. So fiber contributes to satiety, and fiber, like I mentioned, in terms of the cancer prevention piece, helps with colorectal health and helps with just gut health, right? Like having good bowel movement. So in general, digestive health. And then because it contributes to satiety, you end up eating less of the rice and less of roti. And so this would be your balanced plate where you feel full, you feel satisfied, you don't feel as if you've restricted, but you've added some nourishing foods to your plate. Some other ideas for making switches, instead of cornflakes or like a refined cereal, switching over to something like an oats, right? And then you can start to add add-ins to your oats. And this could very well be the cornmeal porridge too that I mentioned, or any of the porridges that we tend to eat. So some add-ins would be adding in some ground flax or chia seeds, adding in wheat bran. That actually helps to boost the fiber content. Instead of a fried plantain, you might do a steamed or a baked plantain, right? And then you add some greens. I believe this was egg and spinach type scramble. So then you add some protein and some greens, switching out from a white bread to a whole grain bread. So these are just some small switches that you can make where you're still having foods that fit and prepared in ways that you like, but it allows you to make more sustainable changes that contribute to good health. I won't get too much into exercise because I know that's the next topic after mine, but because this is one of the areas that was heavily studied for cancer prevention, I did want to focus on it because they actually spoke about walking as an exercise. They examined walking itself, and then they also examined other vigorous type activity. And even though the actual effect of it, not really sure, as I mentioned, if it's because of its contribution to weight management or if it's because it helps with the insulin or a hormone, insulin production. So insulin is one of those hormones that can influence cancer cell growth. If that's the reason for it, then yes, we want to increase physical activity. We also know in other chronic disease prevention areas that physical activity helps. We know from a mental health and wellness standpoint, physical activity also helps. So again, look at where you are. Are you getting 30 minutes per day? Are you getting 60 minutes per day? Are you doing it once per week or 2 days per week? Are you doing it every single day? If you are doing it every day or at least 5 days a week, then you're off to a good start. If you find that it tends to slow down in the winter, which for a lot of people it does because, walking outdoors, if it's slippery or if it's dangerous, or activity can slow down. So then we talk about other types of activity. So find community centers or areas around you that might have in-person programming if they're resuming that, but otherwise, online programs are still in effect. I know Taibu has some. I believe it should be on our website. And if not, then I can email a link to maybe Ken, so Ken can share it with the group. But adding in anywhere from 10 minutes of exercise each day, and then start to build your way up, because the hardest part is actually starting. It's that mental block or that mindset of, let me do 5 minutes. And once you get 5 minutes or you're out there, you can actually get going. I am shifting to this because I mentioned the walking or shifting to winter replacement activities. So in the summer, I'll hear, yes, I can walk long. The days are longer. It's sunny. It's nice outside. I'm walking to somewhere. And then I say, but in the winter, because it starts to get cold anywhere from October onwards. So between October and say March or April, what are we doing? We can't be inside sitting because sedentary or that sitting activity is actually negative for us. So how can we keep moving? And I love these videos. And I'm hoping, is it Mandy who's coming up next after me, I believe? I'm hoping she will corroborate what I'm saying.
Mandy's next.
Yeah. So
hello everyone, Rocky here. Thank you so much for joining me. We are about to start our 1 mile. Are you ready? I know I am. Let's start to warm up. So let's walk in place, relax your shoulders, keep that belly in. We are boosting our immune system right now with our cardiovascular exercise. Side step in 4, 3, 2, 1. So with our walk, we're always warming up to make sure that we have a safe, healthy walk. Way. No more drama. Nothing that...
And I'm showing another one. I won't show the whole thing, but they have various versions. 1 mile walk, which takes about 15 minutes. You can do a 2 mile. And if you have half an hour, then you do the 3 mile, right? So a lot of these, it's just once you start, or once you get going, you just do movement in place.
Hi, everybody. I'm Selena, and I 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Woo, keep it right here. Walk in place.
So it uses what you have. You don't need,
hold you back. You want to press.
Give me a minute. I need to figure out how to advance from here. But you don't need equipment. You just need some space, and usually a small amount of space. So I might get up and do it in front of my TV as an example while I'm watching TV. I have it going on like a small device if you have access to that. And if you have no device, just keep moving in place. Start 10 minutes, work your way up to 15 minutes, and then before you know it, you're progressing to half an hour a day until it gets warm again. So at least this way we're maintaining.
3, 2, 1.
Finally, I got to my next slide. All right. So in summary, what is healthy eating and how do we integrate a lot of these? Yes, it's choosing nutritious foods, but it's looking at our overall eating pattern, which is what we do on a daily basis. It's not one meal or one food item that contributes to good health. It's just overall choices, right? Integrating regular exercise and then starting to implement a bit of that mindfulness. Again, I didn't go into a full detail on it because that could be a whole workshop on its own, but I'm hoping also the later session will take us into how we can integrate that mindfulness approach to healthy eating. My one thing that I always tell people, do not get discouraged. Small steps, pick 1 or 2 things, work at it so that it doesn't become overwhelming. But if you're the person that likes to just get in and make all the changes, I don't discourage that either. Get going, but for sure, make 1 or 2 changes and start taking them, because it does take practice and it takes repetition. And sometimes there's relapse, not failure, just relapse, and then you keep going. And then I'll take more questions if I have 1 minute. I believe I went over. So do you want to leave all the questions to the end, or how would you like to approach this, Ken?
We can wait until you finish and then we'll ask questions. So we'll take questions now, actually.
Okay.
David, you want to stop sharing and then?
Yeah, but I just wanted to look at the chat because
there's one question around quinoa.
Yep. So that's a whole low glycemic grain, and it is a healthy food choice.
Okay.
Yes, it's just a little bit higher price, so I still say go with the variety. It doesn't mean it's just one more thing that you can include. It doesn't mean you have to replace a food with the quinoa. You just integrate that. It's considered a whole grain.
What is the difference between brown rice and quinoa? Which is more healthy?
They're both classified a carbohydrate. The difference is that quinoa will raise your blood sugar levels. Sorry, which one did I just say? Quinoa, because I don't want to misspeak. So they're both carbohydrates, which means that they both have starch. The quinoa itself has a little bit higher fiber content and it has protein, so it raises your blood sugar level less. You get like a less of a response. Whereas brown rice will raise your blood sugar level, not as much as white rice. So we use a classification where we, the glycemic index, which is how a carbohydrate food will raise your blood sugar. And we use low, medium, and high. So quinoa would be a low glycemic, which means the effect on your blood sugar is low and it's more it's not as fast. And then second would be like your brown rice, which is medium glycemic. So there is an effect, it does go up. It's also not as fast, but it's definitely not as slow digesting as quinoa would be. Whereas white rice now, it's quick digesting because there's no fiber, there's nothing in it. So your body digests it really, really quickly. So because of that, the broken down starch, into sugars gets absorbed into your bloodstream fairly quickly, which raises your blood sugar levels again very quickly. So that's a quick digesting.
So there is a question from someone. I
Mhm.
like my nuts salted. For example, pistachio, cashews. What portion size would be ideal?
So salted nuts. Try. I know you like the nuts salted, but let's go down to the unsalted if we can. And I hear you asking about the portion size. That's because that salt can cause us to eat more, right? Salt and sugar will cause us to actually eat more. So if you're going for the salted nuts and we haven't portioned it and we're choosing from a bag and we're eating that mindless eating, which is we're not really aware, you can end up overeating. So start with a quarter cup or a small handful, but you might want to start mixing in a bit of salted with unsalted at least. And then you can do roasted nuts, right? Nuts don't have to be raw, but the roasting of the nuts still has flavor, still carries the same nutritional value, but at least it's not salted where you feel like you need to keep going.
There's a comment that someone made about the slides. This presentation, it's being recorded and we'll send the link to you after.
I can share the slides too, actually.
Yeah, if you can share it to me, we'll put it on our website. Okay, there's another question. Cheeses. Food value of Parmesan compared to cheddar.
So both of those are hard cheeses. From me, when I talk about cheese, it's more from a lactose intolerance perspective or from a gut health perspective. So both of those cheeses would fit because they're low in lactose. But in general now, in terms of good health, you just need a little bit. So there's really no nutritional difference per se, but only use a little bit for flavor, not too much.
Okay. Does fasting have any advantage on health?
That's an area that I'm on the fence on. The way I integrate fasting, like fasting is just more of that trendy term, right? Like I'm fasting outside of religious fast. This is more, I assume this is fast for health, right? And so for me, what I say, which is the mindfulness piece, you're eating when you're hungry, you're stopping when you're full. Fasting then in this case, you're going, even when you're hungry, you're deciding not to eat, you're choosing not to eat. A lot of people are doing these 2-day fast, 3-day fast. I am not supportive of that because again, mentally you're restricting. And if you're the type of person where after restriction, you end up binge eating, then you've undone whatever it is that you were supposed to do. So I still believe in eating when you're hungry, stopping when you're full.
Would a healthy diet look different for people who have diabetes?
Nope, it would actually be the same. The only piece might be where I had like that 2 to 4 fruits. I would probably limit it to the 2 fruits, not really 4. But it would really be the same. Like your plate would look the same. Like I showed the plate. That plate though had white rice on it because that was what was prepared and I was trying to show the difference. I would certainly switch out that white rice to the whole grain type foods or even something like boiled banana, which is low glycemic. Yellow yam is low glycemic. Sweet potato, those are low glycemic. But even though they're low glycemic, which means they don't affect your sugar as high again, you're not going to put too much on your plate because there's something called the glycemic load, which is now you're having too much of it. So it's too much of a good thing or too much of one thing not good, something like that. All right.
If anyone has any question, would you like to unmute and ask a question? Those are all the questions already.
Those were all the questions. Okay.
In the chat. So if anyone has any, so there's another one, GMO versus organic, which is better and why? Get it?
Yes, I did. So organic, I compare the organic with conventional farming practices. So nutritionally, they're not different, but organic would then be better for the environment, right? GMOs for me, I'm still on the fence. I don't have a strict recommendation because there are certain things where I'm always coming from a food equity lens, and a food equity lens would be people being able to afford food. So if someone can't afford $55 per pound wild salmon. I'm not going to tell them don't eat the other salmon that you're finding for $12 a pound, right? So I'm always coming from that food equity lens. So I don't know if that's the perfect question for me, and hopefully my answer helps, but it's always going to be around moderation and not overdoing anything. So Basmati rice, they all fall into that carbohydrate, starch containing foods umbrella. So with the Basmati rice, I see that question. The question in the chat says, what nutritional value does Basmati rice have? It's the same in terms of having starch. If you're choosing a brown Basmati, then it would have some fiber in it. But to me, they're considered in that same group, as in having an effect on your blood sugar or having an effect on weight if you overdo it. Oh, the whole grain cornmeal is Bob's Red Mill. I'll see if I can look it up and again send like an image when I'm sending the slides.
Okay, there don't seem to be any other questions. So, Vernon?
Okay, thank you very much, Ken. And Tamika, thank you very much for a thought-provoking subject that all of us really can probably have something to think about for the rest of the week. Thank you very much. I'm now going to call on Jerry Alexander, who will introduce our next speaker. Okay, Jerry.
Let me get,
Hold
hold on a sec, Jerry. Let me just get you on screen.
I have unmuted already.
Yeah, unmuted. 1 second. Give me a second. Okay, go ahead, Jerry.
Okay, thank you, Vernon. Before introducing the next speaker, I'd like to thank Tamika again for that excellent presentation. You gave us lots of information. I would just tell you that I'm looking forward to having some of that red bean soup with the hot pepper on top of it, and also with about 4 drinks for today. So thank you for giving my wife that recipe. Anyhow, my name is Jerry Callender, and I have the pleasure or the pleasant task of introducing our second presenter this morning. Her name is Mandy Madden. Mandy graduated from the physical therapy program at the University of Toronto in 1994. In 2005, she completed her Master of Science degree in the Department of Rehabilitation Sciences at the University of Toronto. Most recently, she did the Advanced Practice Clinician in Arthritis Care course to become a physical therapist practitioner. Mandy has a wide range of expertise. She has worked in the rehabilitation at Toronto Rehab Center since 1998. Since 2004, Mandy has been working in the MSK Rehab Program as an Advanced Practice Leader, that's APL. Her role is a leadership role, which is interprofessional and focuses on best practice. Currently, she is now working 50% of the time as an APL, which is Advanced Practice Leader, and 50% as a PT practitioner, a physical therapist practitioner. Again, let's welcome Mandy to our symposium today. Welcome, Mandy.
Thank you so much. So good to be here. And thank you, Tamika, for plugging my session. All right, I'll just share my screen. Okay, now, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so yes, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And definitely, I wanted to mention that my area of expertise is specifically, I have a lot of general background, but definitely arthritis and osteoporosis are certainly two areas that I have lots of experience and knowledge with. So we'll talk now a little bit about exercise. I'm trying to advance my, there we go. So I'm hoping by the end of this presentation that you'll have an understanding of the basic principles around exercise prescription and how many different types of professionals that prescribe exercise, what kinds of frameworks they use. We're going to talk about different types of exercise. I'm hoping you'll be able to recall some of the benefits of exercise, and there are many. And I definitely want to spend a little bit of time diving into some of the challenges with engaging in exercise and how we can overcome some of those barriers and sustain exercise in our life. And then finally, I'm going to touch on some of the evidence for exercise in cancer. And I certainly will say that as I prepared for this talk, I must admit, exercise in cancer is not necessarily my specific area of expertise, but I certainly now know somebody who has a ton of expertise around exercise and cancer, and particularly prostate cancer. So if you ever need that gentleman to come back and present for this group, I can probably make that happen. Okay, so it's always a good idea to start with a couple of definitions, because we often use the term physical activity and we use exercise and we use these terms interchangeably. So I thought I would just distinguish the two. So physical activity includes a broad range of activities, and that's any bodily movement produced by our muscles that requires some sort of energy expenditure. And there's a list of examples on the slide here, like walking, going for a walk, walking to work, doing our housework, cleaning our house, gardening, any leisure or recreational activities. And physical activity includes sports and exercise. So exercise is a form of physical activity. The difference with exercise and the other types of physical activities that we just mentioned is that when you're calling physical activity exercise, you are structuring it, you're planning it, you're repeating it, and you're doing it with the intent of improving physical fitness. And one of the components, whether it's cardiovascular fitness, whether you're looking to improve strength or range of motion, and we're going to touch on all of those. So this, just like we prescribe medicine, we also prescribe exercise. And FIT is the framework that exercise professionals use when they prescribe exercise. And I'm going to speak a lot about this throughout the talk, so I wanted to just orientate you to what the FIT principle is. So the F for frequency is the number of times in a week that you'll engage in exercise. The I is for intensity, so how hard are you exercising? And there's a lot of different ways to look at intensity. We can look at the amount of resistance we're using with strength, how many repetitions of exercises we're doing, how hard we're working our in terms of percent of our heart rate, and we'll talk more about that. How long, how much time are we spending? So the T for time, how much time are you spending exercising? And what type of exercise are you doing? What type of approach, what type of strength, what type of exercise is all part of prescription. So this is not an exhaustive list at all, but it is just a list of some of the examples of the types of exercise that you can do. So we're going to speak about all of these. The only one that I might not go into a lot of detail on is the mindful movements, because I'm not necessarily an expert. I've certainly tried yoga and Pilates, and I will speak a bit to those. But the one thing I wanted to say before moving on is one of the other areas that I have some expertise on is chronic pain. And I've looked at a lot of these in that lens, and certainly for the many different types of arthritis in particular. And I can certainly tell you that there is a ton of evidence supporting all of these different types of exercise approaches in terms of reducing pain and improving function. And so I just wanted you to know that one of the big things that I say to people when I'm talking about exercise is the best exercise is the exercise that gets done. So whichever one you find most meaningful or more doable in your life, great. So this is a bit of a complicated looking slide, and I apologize for that. And I'm certainly going to be sending all of you these slides, and certainly I'll give you my email if any of you have questions or want to talk to me outside of this session. I would be happy to do that. So when we speak about range of motion and stretching exercises, the reason why I put this diagram up here is because I just wanted to mention when we stretch, and I'll just use the elbow as an example, when we're moving our joints, and a joint is of course where two bones come together. When we move our joints through range of motion, we are also of course stretching the tissues, the muscles, the soft tissues that surround those joints. And both are very important. We of course want our joints to move freely, and the best example I can say as to why that matters is you can imagine, and I know I'm already starting to struggle with this, things like reaching our toes to cut our toenails or to put our shoes and socks on. If we have stiffness in our hip joints or our knee joints, these kinds of things become more challenging. So just supporting day-to-day function, it's important to have joints that move freely and have good range of motion, as well as muscles that are stretched appropriately. And we'll talk more about the stretching of the muscles. But the other thing I wanted to mention is that doing stretching and range of motion exercises have all kinds of other benefits as well. They can help with reducing pain. Certainly, if you have arthritis in any of your joints, they can become quite stiff. And it's really important that we keep arthritic joints healthy with respect to their range of motion, how much motion they have, how much stretching we're doing with the tissue surrounding the joints. Because one thing's for sure, a lot of people think, oh, I've got arthritis in my joint, I need to avoid using them, I need to avoid moving them. And in fact, it's the exact opposite. So some tips around stretching, because certainly if you're going to engage in any type of exercise, it's always a good idea to do some stretching. You want to avoid excessive pain, but you do want to stretch it to the point where you're starting to feel some pain, some discomfort with that stretch. You don't want to bounce. You don't want to keep doing this. If I'm trying to stretch my elbow out, we're not going to bounce. We're going to actually prolong the stretch and hold that stretch anywhere from 10 to 30 seconds. And of course, you don't want to hold your breath. If you hold your breath, you're not freely delivering oxygen to the tissues, which is very important. So just using the FIT principle with stretching, if you have a particular area that is an issue, maybe you've got a joint that's not moving very well, perhaps you had surgery, maybe you had a joint replacement, or you had surgery that caused tightness or restrictions or stiffness in a particular joint, you may want to stretch that particular joint or that muscle that's become tight every day. But generally speaking, 2 to 3 days of stretching is reasonable. And often if you don't have a particular area that you are having issues with and you need to stretch daily, then generally speaking, you're probably going to combine stretching into any sort of exercise that you're doing. If you're doing a class, you're going to combine some stretching at the end. If you're going for a walk, it's always a good idea to do some stretching at the end of that walk as well. So there are a number of types of exercise that exercises that I'll speak to, but just in terms of intensity, with stretches, you really don't need to do more than 3. If I'm stretching out my elbow, doing that 3 to 5 times max is plenty. It's more with strengthening that we start to increase those repetitions. You do want to, as I mentioned, hold the stretch as opposed to just doing it for 5 seconds. Anywhere from 10 to 30 seconds is a good idea. Not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, right? So you want to hold that count. Now with types of stretches, it's more complicated than you really need to understand. Basically, as you can see, this gentleman lying in the image there is holding a towel and he's pulling with the towel. You know, that's an active assisted type range of motion. So we can actively move our joints through range of motion, or somebody else might move our joint passively, right? If we're having issues and we need help to stretch, somebody else could passively move it. And stretches can be held at a certain position. They can be prolonged for a longer period of time if there is need. Sometimes we combine heat over a joint or a muscle to increase tissue pliability and the ability for those muscles to stretch easier. And sometimes we might use a sheet or a strap to help pull to work on a range of motion. And that's a really good idea to help. I'm just going to show just a couple of images. So these are just some examples of some really good stretches for your back. Taking your knees to your chest, Doing the cat camel or cat cow stretch in the middle helps with mobility in your back. And of course, the one on the far right is looking more at trunk rotation. And these are just some examples. These are just some examples of some stretches that are often helpful to do for our legs. The one on the left is showing the back of the leg, the hamstring. These are classically tight, and this is just showing stretching a hamstring. And the one on the right is showing stretching our hip flexor muscles. And they can get quite tight, especially if we're doing a lot of sitting. So I'm going to move right along to strengthening exercises. So now with strength training, we're really trying to improve and increase muscle strength by having our muscles work against some sort of weight or force. And there are a number of benefits for having strong muscles. One of the major reasons is we talked a little bit about arthritis and the fact that these muscles surround the joints. To have stable joints, we need strong muscles. So that's certainly important. As we start to get older, we start to lose we start to get bone loss, we start to lose strength in our muscles. So as we age, it's really important to keep up strength for bone health. And we talked about range of motion and the fact that day-to-day function, like reaching our toes or cutting our toenails, it's the same thing with strength. Having strength allows us to do day-to-day functional activities, like getting up and down from a chair, going up and down the stairs. These are day-to-day functional tasks that require strength to do them. So moving along, in terms of the types of resistance, there are a number of things that you can use. You can use no type of resistance and just use your own body weight. You can use dumbbells, like dumbbells that you hold in your hands. You can certainly use bands. You can see the lady and the gentleman on the top of this screen are showing some examples of using resistive bands. And then, of course, there are machines at a gym. I know a lot of these gyms are closed right now, and maybe people are avoiding them, but there are, of course, weight machines as well. So for the basic principles for strengthening, if you're thinking about how to prescribe strengthening, 2 to 3 times a week is plenty for trying to do some strengthening exercises. And when it comes to thinking about intensity for strength, so again, the FIT principle, this is around how many times we do that exercise. And really, often when we start out, if I start out to get somebody to do a strengthening exercise, I often will say doing 5 of them is a good place to start, as opposed to jumping right into 10 to 30, right? I mean, generally speaking, studies do show that after you do 3 sets of 10, you're going to see an improvement in that muscle. But we all have to start really slowly, and I'm really going to focus on that a bit later. The other thing that you can do around intensity is increase the weight. So if you're using a 2-pound weight and you're starting to feel like that's becoming easy, then you can start to gradually progress higher weight. Or you can alter your positioning. If you've been doing exercises in sitting or lying down, sometimes by doing them in standing is enough to increase the intensity. And we already talked about the sources of resistance. So this is kind of a busy slide, but I'm just giving you a couple of examples of really good exercises that strengthen the core. So stomach strengthening, abdominal strengthening, as well as the back. So doing a classic pelvic tilt is a way of getting your core to be engaged. If you then, and really all you're doing is taking the small of your back and pressing it down into the surface that you're lying on, and you are already turning on your abdominal muscles. The middle one here, the pelvic tilt with a bridge, when you add lifting up your buttock, you're really intensifying that exercise. Of course, the plank on the bottom is much harder. And if any of you have questions about any of these exercises outside of this talk, as I mentioned, I'm happy to go over them in more detail with you outside of this. So moving on to aerobics. Aerobic is probably one of the really has had the strongest evidence, certainly for reducing pain. It's been used a lot in terms of bone health, but I will tell you in terms of osteoporosis management, now they used to always say, go for a walk. That weight-bearing walking activity is what's going to increase your bone density. Now they really do realize that, yes, that's true, but you also want to strengthen the muscles attached to the bones, and that can help strengthen bones as well. So with respect to aerobic work, we're really trying to train our cardiovascular system, strengthen our heart and lungs. And there's many reasons why that's important. We talked a bit about weight management, but it has a huge effect on our cholesterol and our blood pressure, reducing the chances of heart disease, diabetes, some cancers, which we will speak about, huge benefits for reducing pain. So this also is a complicated slide, but I'm going to try and simplify this. So with respect to taking the FIT principle with aerobic work, really the experts suggest anywhere from 20 to 60 minutes, but I will encourage you that 10 minutes is also amazing. And there are definitely studies that show when we do an aerobic activity like going for a brisk walk for 10 minutes, you are going to get the same sorts of benefits from heart health, cholesterol, diabetes, all of those things with a 10-minute walk as much as you would with a 20 to 60-minute walk. And we'll talk about how to build that up. And I know Tamika touched a bit on that already, which was fantastic. So generally speaking, I'm going to talk more about how often and how much aerobic activity you can do or should do in a moment. But if you want to think about intensity, there are some complicated ways of thinking about intensity, and maybe that doesn't interest any of you, but if it did, I wanted to include it on the slide. You can use heart rate, as is mentioned on the intensity here. So you can target, if you want to do moderate intensity work, you want to target 50 to 70% of your heart rate. And that's complicated. What you need to do is calculate, what is my maximum heart rate? So you have to take 220 and minus your age, and then you have to multiply it by 0.5 and multiply it 0.7, and you get a range. And then when you're exercising, if your heart rate and you're checking it, or you've got a Fitbit and it's telling you your heart rate, you'll know that you're working at a moderate intensity level. But I will tell you this, the talk test works just as well. If you can talk, then you are doing moderate intensity aerobics. If you can sing, then you're probably not doing, you're not working. You shouldn't be able to sing doing moderate intensity work. You can use the rate of perceived exertion. So that's on the top right. So you can look at how hard you're working to see how intensely you're working. And at the bottom of this slide just talks about some examples of what would be considered moderate intensity and what would be vigorous intensity. And so going for a brisk walk would be a perfect example of moderate intensity exercise. And going for a run or doing aerobics or playing tennis, that's probably more of a vigorous. So again, let's go to balance. And I know balance isn't always thought of as the most important potentially exercise. We always talk about aerobics and strengthening, but balance work in particular, as we start to get older, and I can tell you that I'm a real faller. I've fallen the past 2 Christmases, I've fallen and broken something. So I know this applies to me, that's for sure. But balance, generally speaking, you could combine balance work into any of your other twice a week of strengthening sessions. And I can tell you that if you do an online class, and I love that Tamika showed those 2 videos, you know, generally speaking, you're working your balance, you're going to get some strengthening, some range of motion in any of those classes, and that's fine. What I would say in terms of increasing the frequency of balance work is if you have osteoporosis. So if you have cancer treatments that have had an effect on your bone health, then really you want to up to doing that something daily, as easy as just standing on one foot potentially while you're watching the news or while you're washing the dishes. Standing on one foot and challenging your balance every day is what's recommended for in the context of osteoporosis. And there are a number of ways that you can challenge your balance. You can, as I mentioned, reduce your base of support by standing on one foot or standing in that tandem walk shown in the bottom photo. You know, the drunk driving test when they make you walk and you have to put one foot in front of the other. That's an excellent exercise to challenge your balance. If you want to increase the intensity of that, closing your eyes, I would ask that you have something close by to hold on to if you're going to try that, because that really, you'll see a huge difference in how much challenge there is when you reduce sensory input and you close your eyes. Other ways to challenge your balance more is you can do mental tasks while you're doing the balance exercise. So standing on one foot and trying to count backwards from 100 by 7s, which is I have a lot of trouble with that. But if you're trying to do something mental like that at the same time, it's a really great way to up the intensity of the balance challenge. So I know a lot of people don't have a lot of access to pools these days, but if you do, if you have the opportunity to attend an aquafit class or go to a warm water pool and experience hydrotherapy, it is a wonderful place to exercise. The water itself can really make exercising in water, because of the buoyancy, much easier. But as well, depending on the type of exercise and approach of how you exercise in the water itself can be like a dumbbell or like a weight. It actually acts as resistance as well. But the other wonderful thing about water, and this is true whether it's warm water or a cold water pool, is that it really is an amazing pain reducing modality. Because of the decreased weight bearing in the joints, it's much easier to exercise and it's a lot less painful. So just to let you know, if the water is at the level of your waist, you're only getting 50% weight bearing through your joints. So you can imagine if you have pain when you're weight bearing on your joints, you're gonna have a lot less weight bearing when the water's up to your waist. If the water's up to your level of your neck, you're only getting 8% weight bearing in your joints. So much less pain to exercise in the water. And there's a lot of physiological properties about the water itself that also help with pain reduction. And I won't focus too much on that, but if you wanted to know more about that, we can speak more about that. If you had a really swollen joint, just the translocation of fluid can happen as a result of the hydrostatic pressure of the water. And so reductions of swelling absolutely helps with pain reduction. So that's one of the reasons. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the different mindful movements, but they certainly are getting a lot of attention. And I can certainly say that every single one of these have been shown in the literature to be helpful both for health, but also in terms of pain reduction, in terms of Tai Chi in particular is fantastic for balance. Yoga is also there's a lot more stretching involved in yoga and a lot more breathing. Pilates tends to be more of a strengthening focus, but there is lots of support. And if you wanted to know more about that, I can certainly share articles and share more information at another time. Now I love this slide, and this is one of the more important things I like to say when I talk about exercise, because a lot of us have no idea what should we be doing, what should we be striving for. And I can tell you that the National Activity Guidelines, which is what I'm talking about here on this slide, a bunch of experts from the organizations listed at the bottom of this slide, because of huge amounts of inactivity globally across all nations, 1 in 4 people were dying due to inactivity. So there was a huge effort to look at the literature and look at the evidence and put forth these guidelines. And these guidelines are appropriate for elderly people, children, young adults. This is for every age. This is a goal or a strive that you can strive for yourself as you think about your exercise journey and what should I shoot for. This is what we all should be trying to strive for. 150 minutes of moderate, so going for a walk, 150 minutes of moderate intensity of aerobic activity per week. So that could be 5 days a week of a 30-minute walk, or it could be several 10-minute walks. Maybe you're going for a couple of 10-minute walks on one day. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be 5 days of 30 minutes, but you're going to try and shoot for 150 minutes of moderate aerobic work and a couple of days a week of strengthening. And really, the best evidence shows that when we're doing a combination of these types of approaches, you're going to get the best results. And this is just a statement from the American College of Sports Medicine, just speaking about just that, the fact that when we have a regular program of cardiorespiratory or aerobic type work, strengthening, flexibility, all of these types of exercise approaches is the best way to maintain good health. And we're going to talk about those benefits and how they help. In fact, here we are. So this slide lists many of the benefits of exercise. So we talked a bit about how it can decrease pain. It can also help to decrease fatigue. So if you are experiencing fatigue, whether it's because you are undergoing cancer treatments and it's causing fatigue, exercise helps with that. Joint stiffness, we talked about stiffness. Exercise helps with reducing stiffness. In the arthritis world, when we engage in regular exercise, we need less pain medication. We need less time to go and see the doctor because of pain. It reduces our blood pressure. Bone health, it helps with bone density. It helps with strength, as we talked about. Blood sugar levels. So you can refer to this slide, but there are a number of really excellent reasons of why it's important to try and be active. So I want to really dive into, because, you know, we talk about how wonderful exercise is. If it's so wonderful, then how come it's so challenging for all of us to try and stick with it and commit to it? And all of us struggle with this. So I really want to spend some time to give you some tips on how you can maybe overcome some of these barriers. So some of the challenges with engaging in exercise is what we're thinking. So our attitudes, our beliefs. And I'll give you an example. If we're afraid that I'm going to harm myself from doing exercise, that's a classic reason or attitude or belief or thought that we might have that stops us from exercising. And that's my favorite topic to speak about, because absolutely there's a lot of people who worry they're going to hurt themselves or harm themselves with exercise. Exercise can cause some pain for sure, but you are not going to harm yourself for sure, especially if you're set up correctly. The other thing that can be a barrier to exercise is not having any clue of what should I do? What kind of exercise should I do? How much exercise should I do? So without that sort of that type of guidance, that's a huge barrier. Motivation, we all lack motivation at times, and I'm going to speak a little bit about how we can overcome that. Deconditioning, if we haven't exercised in a while, whether it's been because we've had a lot of pain or because we've gone through some medical procedures and we've lacked the energy, it's really hard to exercise when we're feeling very deconditioned. The other challenge with exercise is that it requires a really consistent investment of time and effort. When you take a pill to reduce pain, it's a quick fix. It doesn't work that way with exercise. It's a delayed effect. So in order to see the benefits that you are going to see, and I guarantee that, I give you my personal guarantee, you will benefit, but it's not going to be overnight. You actually have to stick with it, commit to it, and you're probably not going to see those benefits for a good 6 weeks or 4 weeks of sticking with it. So let's talk about how to overcome some of these. With motivation, really the best thing you can do is choose something that you like. So never mind what Mandy's saying, but what do you like? If you like doing an exercise class because others are with you, or you like just going for a walk, excellent. That's what you should be doing. You like cycling, you like doing the stationary bike, whatever it is that you enjoy, that's what you should be doing, and that's what's going to make you stick to it. Setting goals. So I know you've probably heard about goal setting, and when I talk about it at work, they roll their eyes and they're sick of me talking about it. But I have to tell you that personally, I do set goals. And if you have a particular goal, it keeps you focused and helps you keep the momentum moving forward. And we're going to share an example in a moment. Monitoring techniques. I'm going to tell you, I tell all my patients this. I don't tell you to write it down if I'm not writing it down myself. If just like we commit to going to the doctor's appointment by putting it in the calendar, you're not going to say, oh, it's in my calendar, but you know what? I'm not going to bother going to see that doctor, whatever. But if you put exercise into your calendar, then I'm hoping that will help you to commit to it. Put it right into your day timer, put it into your calendar. Keep an exercise diary, keep track of what you're doing. There is evidence to support that if you track it, you monitor what you're doing, whether you're using Fitbit trackers or whether you're writing it down, it helps to stick with it. Bring a friend. Absolutely. Whatever it is that helps you be motivated, whether you bring somebody to go with you and that'll help you stick with it, listening to music, whatever it is that helps keep you motivated, those are the things you need to be trying to do to stick with it. I just thought I'd give a little example of what I mean by goal setting. So you really want to use SMART goal setting. So be very specific about what your goal is. So if you want to walk more, well, what is a specific SMART goal around walking more? What could that look like? So to be specific, I want to walk 3 days a week for 30 minutes. I'm nowhere near there right now, but that's what I want. How do I measure that? So it's measurable because we're talking about frequency, days of week, and time. How many minutes do I want to walk? Is it achievable? I think if I build that up slowly, I could achieve that. So you definitely want to think about what's achievable for you. And is it relevant? Well, I want to improve my health, so it is relevant to me. And how long will it take? Goals are supposed to be timely. So I'm thinking this goal will take me about a month to achieve. So that's just an example of how we might set a goal for ourselves. All right, so overcoming deconditioning. This is a challenging one. So some of the things that I like to say around deconditioning is you need to think about your day-to-day life and all the things that you do. And you really need to think about cleaning your house and the things that you do for physical activity throughout your day. And you want to make sure that you're making room and accommodating for both, right? Exercise, you don't want to just throw exercise on top of that. You want to balance it out. It's never a good idea when you think, I'm having a good day today, it's Saturday, I'm going to clean that house, spend 2 hours cleaning that house, and then I'm going to go for that walk. I'm going to do it all on Saturday. We call those weekend warriors, and that is not the best way to get back in shape. What that's going to do is ruin you. You're going to be on the couch for the next week, and it's not going to motivate you or sustain you or make you feel like you're going to want to do it again. It's going to turn you right off of exercise. So it's a really good idea to pace yourself and use energy conservation techniques, and I have a slide on that in a moment. And we want to really use graded activity programs, and I'm going to teach you what that is. If you haven't been exercising in a while, I'm going to teach you how to use a graded activity program. You want to really, just like when somebody gives you a pill, they always start with the lowest dose, and they very, very gradually increase that dose so that you don't have bad side effects. It's the same thing with exercise. The last thing I want you to do is, if you haven't really done a certain type of activity in a few years or in a few months, you don't want to go full tilt, or you are going to cause some pain, and it's going to make you worry and not want to go back into that exercise program. So this is a bit of a busy slide, and I won't spend too much time because I just want to make sure I'm probably running a bit out of time here. But really, here's where you want to think, if you are dealing with a lot of fatigue and you're very deconditioned, here's where you want to think about the P's of energy conservation on how you can modify some of the things that you are doing. So if you want to fit a walk in your day, but you also have to clean up your house, how can you prioritize what's most important? How can you plan out your day so that you're not using so much energy? Can you do certain things in sitting? Can you try and please rest before you get to exhaustion, right? Taking a little, if you do, I'm going to do part of the house, I'm going to do some of my cleaning here, and then I'm going to take a bit of a rest, and then I'm going to go on to the next part of my house. So really pacing, and really a lot of this is just intuitive, but things that you can do to conserve energy, right? Like using reachers, using aids if that's helpful, using pillows. Often, sitting with good posture has a better way of delivering oxygen to our muscles. So all of those things matter. And knowing when to ask for help. You don't have to do it all. And if you have somebody that can help, then that's always a good idea, especially if it'll enable you to have the energy to go for a walk. So this also seems complicated, but I want to explain it. So there's what I mean by a graded activity program. So here's where you don't want to work at such a low level that you're not in any way taxing yourself and challenging yourself. And you also don't want to go too high where you're just completely ruining yourself, and then you're not going to go back into exercise. Here's where you want to build very slowly. So you want to really go in that sweet zone there where you are not too low and not too high. And let me give you an example. So if you told me I can only walk for about 10 minutes and then I'm ruined, I'm exhausted, or after 10 minutes I have a lot of pain, I might tell you then, you know what? Let's cut that in half and let's start with a 5-minute walk. And that may seem ridiculous, but maybe you do a couple of 5-minute walks throughout the day after and have a rest. But what you are going to do is you're going to start really low. So maybe it's a 5-minute walk. And each week you're going to increase the intensity by no more than 5 to 10%. So you might add a minute, right? So you might say, I'm going to start doing a walk. I'm going to start doing 3 times a week of a walk. I'm going to do 5 to 10 minutes, whatever it is that your tolerance is. And each week I'm going to add a minute to that. And then eventually you'll get to that 30-minute walk. So that's what we mean by a graded activity program. And you can do that with anything. You can do that with going for a walk. You can do that with doing a strengthening exercise. You're going to start low and you're going to build really slowly so that you don't flare yourself, and you can stick with it. So one thing's for sure, some of these things that I just talked about that are helpful for overcoming some of these challenges and sticking with behavior changes such as engaging in exercise, if that is a behavior change for you, those examples that we just spoke about are supported in the literature looking at supporting behavior change in cancer populations. And I've got I certainly can send any of these articles to you, but the article's listed at the bottom. So this particular article did confirm that setting goals, monitoring your exercise, whether it's writing it down in a journal or using a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or something to track how many steps you're taking. Using graded activities, so what we just spoke about in the previous slide, so really building slowly and gradually. Knowing how, getting some instruction on how to exercise, social supports, action planning, problem solving, these kinds of teachable moments can really help support these types of behavior changes. So I'm almost done. So one thing's for sure, there is a ton of evidence and support for exercise in cancer. Exercise is safe before you have a diagnosis of cancer, during a diagnosis, or during cancer treatments, or after cancer treatments. It's safe. And physical activity, in fact, has a huge role in preventing many types of cancers. There's at least 7 different types of cancers that I've read about recently, like colon, kidney, bladder, stomach, esophageal, breast cancer. Many types of cancers it can prevent, but the other point, and more particularly important, is that not only can it prevent certain types of cancers, but it can also play a huge role in improving physical and psychological outcomes for people who do have cancer or are going through cancer treatments, and it improves survival, and particularly with prostate cancer. There is evidence to support increased survival from prostate cancer by being active and engaging in exercise. The other reason why exercise really matters in the context of cancer is that sometimes the treatments themselves cause some side effects, such as cardiovascular issues, problems with cholesterol, blood pressure, problems with our bones, right? Decreasing our bone density, causing fatigue. And in particular with prostate cancer, the hormonal therapies can cause reductions in muscle strength. And if there's ever a reason to engage in exercise, it's to overcome some of these side effects and improve your health overall and your survival. So what has been looked at for patients with prostate cancer and other types of cancers, they've looked at the literature and they've looked at many studies examining this, and what they have realized. So we talked about the national guidelines, and we talked about the 150 minutes of aerobic activity. Specifically in the cancer populations, what they feel is best is trying to achieve a minimum of 90 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic exercises. So that could be 3 times a week of 30 minutes, or that could be however way you want to spread it out. And like I said, you could go for a 10-minute walk. You can go for a 5-minute walk. You can spread it out however which way you want, but if you can try and shoot for 90 minutes, that's ideal. And a couple of days a week of strengthening. And we talked already that there's many different types. So I think maybe I've gone a bit over here, but what I did want to say is that it's safe. You want to try and shoot for the 90 minutes, or if you can, 150 minutes and a couple of days of strengthening. And you want to try and think of some of these barriers that I talked about and see if you can try and use some of those strategies to overcome those. One final point I will mention is, if any of you are interested in you are, or you have gone through cancer or have had cancer treatment, there is an opportunity for you to get some free 12-week structured exercise if you like, because one of my colleagues did mention they're doing a study. So I will send that information to this group, and you'll have an email and contact address for you if you are interested in having that opportunity. I have a bunch of resources for you. Certainly some of these are particularly helpful for exercise with prostate cancer. True North is an amazing website you can check out. I love that Tamika had those walking videos, because for sure you don't need to go to a gym. You can walk around your house. You can engage in some of these exercise programs online. And there are some references as well at the end. So if there's any questions.
Maybe you can stop sharing and.
Oh yeah, sorry. Sorry.
So there was one comment, is 175 to 300 minutes of exercise per week the recommended amount of physical activity the best?
According to the national guidelines that was looking at health of the whole population, 100%, 150 minutes is what I strive for, and it is what I would recommend to be your goal overall. But definitely within the studies that have looked at the cancer populations, they have recommended 90 minutes at a minimum. So you could look at 90 minutes as your minimum goal and 150 to 300 as your higher end goal that you might want to shoot for long term if you're not engaging right now.
So as people age, do those minutes reduce, or we
No.
should try to keep the same, exactly the same?
It's the same, no matter if you're a child or if you're, these are the same recommendations for every age.
Can excess exercise be counterproductive?
That's a great question. Yeah, exercise can be counterproductive if you are doing it in an unhealthy way. For example, I talked about those weekend warriors. So you're going to choose everything you're going to do for physical activity on one day on the weekend. That's not healthy. That can cause what we call boom bust cycles, where you're doing too much on one day and then it leads to pain or it leads to injuries, and that's not going to have you sustain that. You're not going to want to return to that activity. So that can be a problem. Or if you do something that is beyond your abilities, you lift something too heavy, right? When you think about weights and how much weight should I lift, you want to make sure you can lift that weight at least minimum number of repetitions. So if you can't do it more than 5 to 10 times, it's probably too heavy, right? So you want to think about not injuring yourself. So yes, it can be harmful if you are not set up appropriately, right? And doing it very gradually and slowly.
Is there a website where one can find the, sorry, it just disappeared. Is there a website where one can find the physical exercises, strengthening you showed at the beginning of your presentation?
Is there, sorry, I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question.
Is there a website where one can find the physical exercises you showed at the beginning of your presentation?
Yeah, some of the images that I showed?
Yeah, is there a website?
I don't know if there's this, I can look further into websites that are helpful for exercises and share for this group for sure. I don't know if there's a specific website that has those exercises. I could probably look into that, but definitely the True North gives lots of amazing guidance around examples of exercise and how to exercise safely and how to get started. So there are definitely helpful websites. Wellsprings also has an amazing set of resources to help guide exercise and also give you access to online programs. The Arthritis Society has examples of exercises for sure as well, and I can always share the website for them. But in terms of a website that just shows specific examples of what I have, I'm not sure. I might have to look further into that and see if I have some helpful examples for you. I'm certainly happy to share, handouts of exercises for anybody if they're interested. I'm happy to do that.
You can send that to me and then I'll share it. We'll also share the slides with the audience here so they can get those websites.
Yeah, like if, for example, if people are interested in some handouts that give examples of the types of exercises you could do for your back versus your legs versus your arms, I'm happy to do that. Put something together.
Send that to me and I'll share with the audience.
For sure.
It's not a question. Thank you for talking about thoughts and attitudes. What exercise can you do when you're so fatigued?
Oh, that's a great question. So if you're really fatigued and if that means that you can't walk at all, right? Like if that's the level of fatigue you're referring to, there are a lot of exercises that you can still do in lying. I actually forgot to mention it with one of my slides, but one of the strengthening slides showed an image at the top and I meant to point it out. Sometimes when you're doing a strengthening exercise, you're not moving your joints at all. You're just tightening the muscles without even moving your joints. Those are the ones that I often recommend when an isometric strengthening or tightening of muscles. That's a wonderful thing to do when you don't have a lot of energy and you can't even imagine getting off the bed. You're lying down. You can tighten and strengthen those muscles without getting up and standing, without going for a walk, without moving your joints at all. So there definitely are examples of exercises when you're really in that state. But I would push that even if you're feeling low energy, even if you go for a minute walk today and you go for 2 minutes the next day, doing a little bit and pushing yourself, even though it's the last thing you want to do, eventually you are going to see the benefits and you're going to have improved energy.
Is there a better time of the day to exercise, example, before or after meals?
Yeah, that's a great question. There is not. There's nothing that I've read or ever been advised that there's a particular time of day that's better than another time of day. I will say that what I usually do with my patients is I really work with their day. And I usually have them walk me through, what does your day look like? Tell me what your day looks like. And I usually try and give some advice on when I think I could help in terms of when they might want to add that into their day. But really, like I said, the best exercise is the exercise that gets done. So if you find in the morning you have no energy or you're very stiff, and the last thing you want to do is get into exercise in the morning, you're not a morning person, that's perfectly fine to do it later in the day. The only thing I'll mention is if you're doing it really, really late at night, sometimes that can impact sleep. That can get you really awake and then you can find it harder to go to sleep. Other people though find when I exercise at night, I'm exhausted and I sleep better. So that's why it's a tough answer. And I would say there is no real ideal. It's best to pick what's best for fitting into your life, what works best for you.
All right, sounds great. Vernon?
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much, Mandy.
So there's one more question.
Okay, go ahead.
I would like to hear more about the 12-week exercise study.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Do you want me to tell you something right now, or do you want me to just share the presentation? Because the gentleman that I told you who has specific expertise, and he might have been the better person to present to this group. And I know that if you wanted him in the future, I could try and make that happen for you guys.
Yes, we'll probably want him in the future. If you can send it to me and then I can share it.
For sure, because he gave me a whole bunch of slides describing it. It's a 12-week exercise program, and it's completely structured with somebody supporting you through it. And I believe that it can be online and all of that. So I think it's an exciting opportunity for sure.
Yeah, we can even put it on our website as well.
For sure.
Okay. Sorry, Burnham, go ahead.
No, that's okay. Hey, we want to make sure we get all the questions answered. What I was about to say, Mandy, is thank you very much for the topic that many of us, the more mature, can relate to. So that's really great to know that even at our age, we can still do exercise.
For sure. And I'll send along my email address. So if any of you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to speak to any of you at any time outside of this session.
Excellent.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Again, at this point in time, we're going to have a 10-minute break, and hey, you're free to get up to stretch, go to the washroom, whatever. But I have is just about 12 o'clock. So we'll come back about 12:10. As I would suggest you get up, stretch, get up from where you're sitting. I know it's a bit difficult, to be sitting for so long. So get up, get something to eat, drink, and we'll be back here 10 after 12, okay? So looking forward to seeing you then. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, by my watch, it's 10 after 12, so I think it's about time for us to resume. And I will call on Winston Class to introduce our next speaker. I think I saw him. Is he on?
I'm here.
Good, go in. Okay. Go ahead, Winston.
Okay. Orit is a psychiatrist with Mount Sinai Hospital Pain Management Clinic and Women's College Hospital. Our focus of interest is psychotherapy, mindfulness, and chronic pain. She's a certified mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher through Brown University and regularly teaches mindful-based stress reduction groups. Welcome to our symposium, Dr. Zumi.
Thank you. And I've really enjoyed the last two presentations. I'll just share my slide. And I love how all the presentations do overlap and, really have helped bring some emphasis on the different areas. So hopefully this will seamlessly fit in. So right now, what I'll focus on is mindfulness, and it probably won't require as much time, I think. So hopefully we'll try to finish on time anyways. So today what we're going to cover is the what, why, and how of mindfulness. So first with the what is mindfulness meditation? And I'm going to start with a pretty common definition, although there are different definitions of mindfulness. And this one is, it's an awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment in a non-judgmental way. And basically what that means, or overall what we talk about when we're referring to mindfulness, is being aware of what's happening right here, right now. And we often include the idea of also being kind to ourselves for what is appearing now, because at times we can also experience suffering for what's here now. And I just want to make an extra point about the term non-judgment, because, it's part of human nature that we have judgments. So it doesn't mean don't have any judgments. What's really meant by paying attention in a non-judgmental way is whatever you do notice moment to moment, to not add, whether in the present moment you're noticing pain, suffering, judgments. Don't add extra judgments or storylines or analysis. Simply notice what's happening in the moment. So I'm going to now talk about just a little bit of brief history about how mindfulness really became more mainstream in the West. And perhaps some might even call it in a way trendy, but just going back to some of what led to that kind of real increase in a way, and becoming part especially of the wellness lifestyle and medical treatment. So Jon Kabat-Zinn, he founded mindfulness-based stress reduction clinic at the University of Massachusetts Medical School in 1979. And so he developed the MBSR program, which is probably one of the first more structured programs to teach people about mindfulness and having their own mindfulness practice. This is a form of mindfulness training that I took and that I teach. So although mindfulness shows up in many different forms, I do give some more airtime to MBSR, that's what it is for short, since I know it best. Jon Kabat-Zinn has a PhD in molecular biology through MIT, which his background in research really helped lay the foundation for research and making mindfulness really an evidence-based treatment. One of his many books, Full Catastrophe Living, really outlines in great detail what MBSR is, research behind mindfulness, and giving in-depth information about the practices and how to start a practice. This program was originally used as an option of last resort for people with various chronic conditions from around the hospital. If there was nothing else that was working for them or wasn't enough, then patients were sent to have mindfulness. And the thing is that it worked. It is no longer considered a treatment of last resort, but instead it's considered a complement to other medical treatments. And in fact, some people don't see it as a medical treatment at all. But even if they don't have a specific treatment that they're focusing on, you know, even something like MBSR or other forms of mindfulness, it just becomes part of their lifestyle routine. But I'm just talking about some of the roots in this respect. So MBSR is an 8-week program, and it includes guided meditations that are done in class that are 30 to 45 minutes long, and really incorporating a mindfulness practice. Later on, we're going to do a much shorter practice together, just so you have a taste of it. I realize some of you might already have varying degrees of practice, but you know, so we can all get a taste of it, because it's really an experiential thing. It's one thing to talk about it, but it's a whole different thing when you start to actually recognize what happens when you do it. And so after the practice, there's some time for sharing, for inquiry, and after we do our practice, I'll invite people in the chat if they want to share like what it felt like. And I'm not just saying anything positive, but overall what they may have noticed, how it was for them. And in the mindfulness program, also there's different themes of mindfulness that are brought up, things like changing perspective, stress reactivity versus response, mindful communication, mindful consumption, and changing habits. And also there's mindful eating. So that overlaps a bit with what Tamika mentioned earlier. And I'm going to talk just briefly again later on about how you might incorporate that. So what I really want to point out with this slide is just to say, since the start of the development of the MBSR group, research on mindfulness and using it as a strategy that can be helped with wellness and medical and mental health conditions, the studies have grown at a very fast rate over the years. And back for a sec to mindfulness-based stress reduction, it has shown that it can be helpful for in various ways for people with stress, chronic pain, which is my area of expertise, cancer, anxiety, depression, other chronic issues. Since the time of MBSR has started, there have been several adaptations that have also been studied that may specifically look at maybe certain kinds of conditions. Altogether, these are all called mindfulness-based interventions, or MBIs. So one very common one is mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which specifically targets preventing depression relapse. So people who've had many depressive episodes, really helping to counteract future episodes of depression. There's also mindfulness-based relapse prevention, which targets more people who have problematic drinking or other drug use and help them really work on that. There's one specifically for eating disorders, pregnancy, physical activity, and so on. So the best way to, as I mentioned, to learn is through experience, and especially when it comes to mindfulness. So we're now going to have together a brief mindfulness practice and choose how you'd like to or not like to participate, but it's just going to be a brief snapshot, and I don't think it's going to be over 10 minutes, probably less. Okay, so the invitation now, just a second. Okay, the invitation now is to simply notice where you are, right? Do you notice yourself in the present moment? Are you busy in your mind planning what you're going to do next? Perhaps you are really focused on my voice, or there's something else. So just that brief check-in. And if you will, invite awareness to come to this moment. Come right here to the sense of sitting or however you're positioned. And put aside for now any doings of the mind, right? All the planning and fixings, can that be there for later? You might choose to close your eyes, and often that's helpful for turning inwards, but you don't have to, and you could also simply softly gaze out in front. And start by really noticing yourself sitting or however you're positioned, noticing the feet, if they're supported by the ground beneath. And notice whatever you do notice there, the physical sensations, perhaps pressure, touch, temperature. There's no wrong here. Noticing the sense of the thighs in the seat, perhaps supported by the chair, wherever you are. Softening anything that doesn't need to be tense so tightly here, receiving support to sit. Now noticing the torso, noticing posture. Is there a slouching posture? Are you sitting forward or back? And can you invite, if you will, a balance between an ease, so not a rigid posture, but also one that encourages dignity, alertness, awakeness. And there might be more of an upright posture. You might even come a bit forward or tilt the pelvis a little forward to sit upright, but not making it rigid, and doing what you need to care for yourself here. Now softening through the shoulders. Perhaps they might come a little bit back and down. Softening through the arms, the hands that may be on your lap or clasped together wherever they are. And allowing the head to reach up towards the sky. And now what we're going to do is just a few very brief mindful stretches together. And of course, you know yourself best. So if anything doesn't feel right, perhaps just do a little less or imagine it, which still counts, still activates the brain. So the invitation now is to allow the arms to come forward, perhaps part way up, or just one arm if one doesn't feel right to come up. And breathe, and the arms might come all the way up. So just notice what works for you, and notice sensation as you move the arms. And then allow the arms to come back down, relaxing and noticing. Noticing the release and checking in. And now perhaps allowing the shoulders to do some work. So the shoulders might come towards the ears, and notice the build of tension, breathing with the movement. They might come forward, down and back, and starting to make circles with the shoulders, if you will. How does this feel? So listening to the internal wisdom to guide the movement, however it works best for you. Breathing and changing direction. And releasing the shoulders by the sides, checking in, noticing how that feels. And now we'll do some upper body, what Mandy alluded to before, the upper body cat and cow. So you might start by rounding the upper torso and head forward. So this is kind of like a scared cat. So as if you're going to look down. And then arching the upper back, and you're starting to look up and not overstraining the neck, but starting to reach up, opening the chest, bringing back the shoulders and noticing what this feels like. And breathing. And perhaps doing that alternation a few times on your own, allowing the breath to guide the movement. Noticing the stretch through the back and then through the front. And noticing how the body takes this up. Adjusting in any way that works for you. And when you're ready, coming back to your seat and checking in. And taking a moment just to notice the impact of those movements on how the body and mind feel right now. And now we're going to spend a few minutes on the breath, which is a very common place to bring awareness in mindfulness, just seeing what it feels like for you. So start by noticing where in the body the physical sensations of breathing are most easily felt. And for many, that can be at the belly with the stretch and release, or somewhere in the torso. But it could also be the nostrils or somewhere else in the body, or the whole body breathing. So with the lightness, and without the need to change the breath, you might just take a deeper breath to start, to ground. But then settling into your natural breath as you're already breathing. And you might even, if you'd like, put a hand on the belly just to really start to notice it. And just like a leaf that like the leaf of awareness floating on the wave of the breath here. Noticing the full duration of the in-breath and out-breath as best you can. And when the mind wanders, knowing that's very normal. And flexing the mindful muscle is really inviting awareness back gently to this moment, this breath. So even if this one breath or half breath is the first time you've become aware of this whole practice, can this be enough right now? Just touching base right here. Noticing the uniqueness of each breath. A way of anchoring into the present moment. And if the eyes were closed, you might gently start to open them and just notice if any part of the body can use some stretch or movement. And I'm going to move on for the sake of time, but I'm also going to invite any reactions, how that felt, what people noticed in the chat, which we can look at later. Okay. So why mindfulness? How is it helpful? So we will be examining next why mindfulness is helpful in dealing and coping with various stressors, physical and mental illnesses. We're normally stressed out by a busy mind and go on to this autopilot mode. We focus either on the past and we go over what was, maybe what should have been, regrets, and so on. And that can often lead to a lot of depressive thoughts, depressive feelings, and we can have depressive behaviors like a wish to withdraw or put ourselves down. Or we're often somewhere in the future, worrying about what's going to be, fantasizing, planning, and at times that can lead to anxiety. And anxiety can be felt as we're out there and not really realizing. We can have lots of worrying thoughts and behaviors such as getting on edge and irritable with others and so on, things that we may not want. And so being present gives us space It's a way of easing the stress of the autopilot mode, which we're often on, and helps make choices that may be more helpful for us to get out of that place and come back and notice, okay, what would be helpful for me right now? You can notice your reactions of just looking at the person with the mind bubble, right? The person on the left with a busy mind, and just notice that and how that makes you feel. And the person on the right who's right there and doing a visual mindfulness practice, just noticing the mountains. And how does it feel in that moment when you focus there? And so using brain imaging studies, we can see that mindfulness does really change the brain in ways we would predict. So regions in orange regions in orange known to be linked to greater awareness of the self and the body were activated following mindfulness-based interventions. And also regions in blue and green known to work with attention and broadening perspective taking were also more active following these treatments. Mindfulness can also be helpful with whatever your current life circumstances bring, whether you're suffering with depression, chronic pain, or cancer, or anything else, or you just want to touch life more deeply and learn more about yourself. It is really also part of various spiritual and cultural settings, coping with stress in various corporate settings and work. And it's even been used in studied with prison inmates and staff, as that can be, as you could imagine, very stressful. So mindfulness promotes physical health, like through creating greater body awareness, promoting relaxation, improving stress management, and coping skills. Some of the earliest research with MBSR focused on treatments for a skin condition called psoriasis and chronic pain. And I'll just mention for a moment psoriasis. One of the main treatments for psoriasis is using UV light and having several sessions where you stand in a light box, right? And what was done, because psoriasis is such a physical thing that can be measured, it was one of the earliest studies by John Kabat-Zinn, and half the group just had that standard treatment, and the other group had the treatment of UV light, but also were listening to mindfulness recordings as they went through that treatment. And what was found, that those that listened to the mindfulness and were doing mindfulness while they were there, their psoriasis actually healed 4 times faster. Now with chronic pain, it's also been shown to improve coping with pain. For some, it can reduce intensity with regular practice, dependence on pain relievers, and pain-related disability. Learning how to monitor experience with acceptance allows for emotional buffering and regulation, which leads to stress resilience and coping under stress. This is how we believe it might be helpful. Chronic stress also impairs the immune system, like the ability to mount an antibody response. And mindfulness-based interventions have been shown to improve immune chemical markers like bone marrow transplant patients. There's also been study in cancers like women breast cancer and men with prostate cancer, and it's been shown to reduce cancer-related anxiety, avoidance, and fear related to a cancer reoccurrence. So my main area of expertise is chronic pain and mindfulness. So we can here look to see how it can be helpful for pain. First, it is helpful to understand that pain is experienced and processed through the brain. The pain processing there can change thoughts, feelings, and actions, which are also processed through the brain. And then these emotions and thinking areas in the brain feedback on the pain regions and then alter them as well. So it's like a cycle. Often we can have negative thoughts and reactions to our pain, which can then further amplify things and kind of activate both areas more. So we can think of mindfulness as a way of bringing awareness to these thoughts, feelings, and actions, and which gives more space potentially to change them, which helps stop the cycle. Another way that we could say the same thing is using this analogy that I often like because it's such a visual, concrete thing. We can have one arrow that we can't change in life, and those are stressful circumstances that just happen. And like the book by John Kabat-Zinn, life is full of catastrophes, unfortunately, that you can't change. But we have a second arrow of suffering when we add the thoughts, emotions, and reactions about the first arrow of suffering. So mindfulness can help bring awareness to the first arrow and stop the second arrow before it goes too far. So mindfulness-based interventions have also been studied and shown improvements in various mental health conditions, as shown here. So how do we do a mindfulness practice? So we just did it together, so that will hopefully give you some idea, but I'm going to kind of say it in some words now. So mindfulness meditation, we practice it, and you could think of it as having at least 2 steps here, right? First, we choose an anchor, which is somewhere in the body or somewhere outside where we bring awareness to the present moment. And so we anchor back when we've wandered off. When you notice the mind wanders off, you gently but firmly bring it back to the anchor. So this is really building the mindful practice. I also want to differentiate 2 basic categories of mindfulness. First, there's a formal practice, which is a time you set aside, maybe 5, 30, or 40 minutes. I almost like to think of it as kind of like Mandy mentioned, physical activity versus exercise, right? So exercise is kind of like the formal mindfulness practice. You're choosing to set aside this time. It's just for that, and you're doing it in a very structured way. And you might be following a guided meditation that you've listened to, or you're self-guiding yourself to wherever you chose your anchor to be. And then an informal practice is simply bringing awareness to your day as it unfolds. You might go for a walk and notice yourself walking. You might be eating and noticing all the senses used in eating. And just to go back to Tamika's presentation, mindful eating might even start earlier, where you notice the sense of hunger, you notice the sense of starting to feel full, and so on. That might go along with it. Typically, the programs like the mindfulness-based interventions involve both a regular formal practice and building an informal practice, but however you bring mindfulness into your day can be helpful. So start wherever you are. So we could think of a regular mindfulness practice as changing the brain, sometimes known as neuroplasticity. During an individual practice, you may feel more relaxed or anxious, and whichever you are feeling, it still counts. And so if you are feeling relaxed, that's an added bonus, but that's not the main intention, at least that has been studied overall, but that may be what you'd like. But it is really the regular practice over time that changes the brain, according to research. And I like to use an analogy of someone that wants to build their arm muscles. So say they see a trainer, or they see someone to learn how to hold the weights and how to lift the weights. And maybe that's like once a week. It's kind of like coming to the class, or, or just kind of really spending time on it once a week. And but then in order to really change the brain, it's about doing the regular mindfulness practice. Even if at the beginning, kind of like starting a workout, you might start noticing more achiness when you first start. But over time, you might notice less mind wandering. It might start to feel a little bit easier, more stillness overall. So this is just to show that mindfulness is really everywhere. And sometimes we speak of things as being mindful, and we're not always necessarily speaking of the same thing. And I'm not going to say too much more about this for the sake of time, but just to give some examples. And for example, yoga. Yoga can be is a mindfulness practice, but it can also be done as a very physical practice, and it could be done very mindlessly. So, and mindful movement. Physiotherapy can be done in a very mindful way, or exercise, or it could be done mindlessly if your mind is somewhere else. So just some tips to support your practice. Set aside time and space. Sit comfortably with your eyes closed or soften your gaze so you're not distracted by things around you. Observe the present moment, put aside the judgments as best you can, and be kind to the wandering mind, as that's very normal, and even more so at the beginning as you're getting used to it. And feel your breath or another part of your body as an anchor. Start small, and if longer practices feel too much, then it's kind of that graded approach. You might eventually get, into a longer practice, but start wherever you are. And here are just a few different books, online supports and apps. And there's so many out there, and these are just a few of the bigger ones. And I put YouTube here just because you could go on YouTube, and I'm not they're not giving me money for this, but just you could put in mindfulness meditation and go from there. And there's some centers where you could enroll in groups as well, in retreats. So I'm going to end there. Okay. And I believe that's it for the presentation.
So there's some questions in the chat.
Okay.
So does mindfulness slow the progression or prevent Alzheimer's and dementia?
Ooh. I probably can't speak too much to that, but what I could say, I do know something that I could say for sure. In with early cognitive changes, impairment, meaning like when, those that might start to have some changes in their cognition, it's been shown to be helpful for things that can then worsen cognition or thinking further. Because often there's a lot of anxiety, and so it can help with anxiety and help overall with getting tasks done. In terms of higher levels of, reduction in cognition related to dementia, I'm not sure if it's been studied so much in that population. I could imagine it's harder to do, but that's a really interesting topic. Yeah.
So the next one is, when breathing, should it be through the nose?
Right.
Or the mouth?
Yeah, and it's really common to get questions about like how to breathe properly. And I think it's common that various forms of either yoga or relaxation practices, there's like you're supposed to breathe a certain way. And I'd say for mindfulness, it's less about breathing a certain way, and we're all breathing. So it's really just noticing the natural breath. So not trying to control it in any way, but just notice. And if you start to, sometimes by bringing awareness to it, we start to change it a bit, then notice that. You don't need to try to then manipulate it to try to get normal, but it's not about trying to. And you might notice by bringing awareness to the breath that it might actually start changing over time. I do want to also add, for some people, the breath can increase anxiety. So a lot of people find it helpful and a way to ground and relax. But it's not necessarily the best anchor for everyone to start with. So other things like sounds or other parts of the body can be more helpful.
Is there any recommended length?
So I'll say that the programs that are developed for various wellness, I guess, outcomes, often the length is between 30 and 45 minutes, which is pretty long. And it's helpful to do it in a group setting to really get it going, right? And so there's been a lot of research showing that that's really helpful, because that's what those groups have done. And I believe there's something to it, to a dose-dependent effect, meaning you do more, likely you're going to get more. There's some people like monks that do it for hours a day, and that probably it is really helping them. But I would say whatever you're doing, if you're doing it in a good quality way, and if it's just 5 minutes, it's likely having some benefit if you're doing it on a regular basis. Yeah.
Okay. Are there any other questions? If you can unmute and ask the question if you need to, or put it in the chat. No?
Yeah, question.
Yeah.
How would you say you've achieved your goal in mindfulness?
So are we talking about achieved your goals?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, that's an interesting one for mindfulness. So one way of talking about mindfulness is that putting goals aside, actually, because when you're focused on goals, you're away from the present moment. And another way of, but it's helpful to have goals just to get you motivated, but then put those aside. The other thing I would say is often the benefits you get from mindfulness may not be what you initially were hoping for, but might be quite helpful. And I don't think that there's a right answer to that. I think when you're noticing in some way or another, it's you're feeling better. You're better able to shift into the present. You're less reactive with others. That's actually one of the more common things I hear from people. They might be in the program because they want to reduce pain or whatever it is. And then their partner starts telling them how they've changed. They may not even notice, but like how they're softer with them, right? Or they're less on edge. So it's helpful to have goals to come into it. But once you're in it, things may change and you might notice that other things show up. So it's helpful to have an open mind. So definitely, SMART goals are helpful, setting aside time and building up, but then notice how it might help and keep doing it if you're finding it's helpful, right? If you're not, then, maybe it's not for you.
Would you say it helps you to concentrate better rather than your mind wandering from
Yeah, and it's also been used for some with ADHD. I don't think it's the main treatment for attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, but yeah, overall it can be helpful for concentration. Yeah. I know for me, like I can run off with all the plans and so on, and then it's not really helping me because I'm not there on task. And then to shift and to really be present with you, then it's hard for people to multitask, but I could really get things done well if I'm able to come back. Yeah.
It's a question: how can we follow your work?
Sorry?
It's a question someone is asking: how can they follow your work?
My work. Like meditations?
Yeah. Do you have stuff on YouTube, website?
Yeah.
Etc.
I do. It was mainly developed for specific programs, but it is actually available to anyone can find it. So if somebody has SoundCloud, you don't actually have to have a paid subscription, and you just look for my name. There are some recordings there that I actually use, most of them, not all, for the MBSR classes. So SoundCloud, I can even, if you have trouble finding it, I could also give you the longer link. And then on YouTube, there was an initiative that I did to help healthcare workers. And so there's 2 short videos for Pause for Providers, under Pause for Providers. If you look up my name, you'll probably also likely find it there. But I can give those 2 as well. But I could put pause. If you look up Pause for Providers, it's really accessible for anyone to do there on YouTube.
So there's another question: what is the opposite of mindfulness?
Autopilot or mindlessness, I guess. That's the quick answer. There's probably more to it than that, but not being in the present. Not being aware, right? Because you could sometimes be thinking of the past, but you could be doing so in a way that you're really aware of it. Like you're choosing to go there, but kind of not even realizing it, right? You're just off somewhere else. And you probably don't even know you're in a mindless state, right?
Mindlessness.
Yes, mindlessness, yes.
Any other questions? Can children learn it?
Yeah, there's a lot of initiatives out there for children, and there's actually, if I just go to in the room I'm in, there's a special prop. So if I bring it, 1 second, So this is just one example. Often it's helpful to make it into games or very concrete small things. And this is something I've used in an adult course, but it's kind of like you can get this thing, or you can use other things, but it's kind of like, let's breathe like a balloon. So let's take an in breath and breathe out and notice yourself breathing. So it's kind of like making it more to a game, and the parent and child or two children can hold either end of this and breathe as they bring it in and out. So that's an example, but it's been used, I think more and more it's being used in school settings. I think children sometimes are teaching their parents how to be more mindful, you know, and often they're shorter practices and very concrete in that way.
I don't think there are any other questions. So, Vernon,
okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ken. Dr. Zamir, thank you very much for actually speaking to us on a subject that relates to our fast-paced society. And it's just, as we've heard probably time and time again, take time to smell the roses. So in your presentation, you're telling the individuals for them to take time to be in the moment. So thank you very much. Okay, believe it or not, we've actually come to the end of our symposium. Not quite. This is just a wrap up, and then I'll probably hand it over to Ken. But I'd just like to say a big thank you to all of our presenters today, because your topics have actually given us lots of information to think about in the coming days and weeks. So thank you, and thank you very much again, and thanks to our audience, international audience, for being here as well, and for taking the time out as well. We appreciate your coming. So Ken?
Yes, so we always like to hear back from you. We will want to get your feedback. So I'm going to launch a poll here. It's just 2 questions. Could you please indicate what you felt about today's presentation? So if you write on your screen, if you can just answer those questions, we really would appreciate it. This helps us to plan for the symposiums as well.
Got a question for you, Ken.
Yes.
This is Mohan Duku.
Yes.
I was invited by Ken Douglas to join in today's session.
Mm-hmm.
And I am very, very happy that I did join in, because I picked up quite a bit of useful information. The thing is, there is so much information here. And for an old guy like myself, I doubt whether I will be able to remember 1/3 of it. So I would appreciate if you could make the slides available to us.
So we will. We'll send you a link to the recording so you can listen to it again. Also, we'll make the slides available to you, which I will get from the speakers and make them available to you. As well, we're going to post it on our website, so you can go back and invite people to join, to look at the website and actually see the presentation again.
Now, I got a brief email from Ken Douglas early this morning, and I didn't see your website. Now, when we register, you have our email addresses, right?
Yes, we have. So we will email them to you, to the people who registered. So we have your email addresses.
And Mandy had offered to share her email address for an offline engagement. Could you please send that out also?
Yes, Mandy, can we share your email address? You gotta unmute.
100%. I can put it in the chat right now if you like. I was planning on putting it on one of the slides, but I'm happy to do it on the chat right now.
That would be great.
Yeah, put it in the chat and put it on one of the slides as well, and then we'll share it with everyone. Okay. We're gonna end the poll now. So this is what people are saying about the whole presentation. Of the 39 responses, 30 people said all of the presentations were, they gained the most from all of it. And most people, 29 of 39, 74% were very satisfied with the whole symposium today, which is very good, which is exactly what we wanted to do when planning this symposium. We do the symposium once a year, but in the fall, we have a big conference we're planning. It's going to be both in person and online as well. And that's our annual conference we're planning in the fall. And of course, we have monthly meetings that are ongoing. You can look at our website to see when the next speaker is, and we'll be sending out that information as well. Vernon?
Yes. Thank you. Yes. Okay. Again, I'm just going to say a thank you to the presenters, to all of the attendees. And we sincerely hope that you have acquired a lot of knowledge from the presenters really today, and that not only you acquired the knowledge, but you're going to put them into practice in the future. So we thank you again.
Yeah, there was a question, are we based in Ontario? Yes, we're based in Ontario. However, because we do stuff online, we are seen in the United States, in the Caribbean, etc. So give us your email address, stay in touch, and whenever we have these things, we'll always include you in the invitation. And also want to thank the African Cancer Support team based in Calgary. They were really great. And thank you for sponsoring this along with us. Thanks. Thank you, and have a great rest of the day.
All right, take care, guys.
Okay, thanks to everyone. Continue to remain safe and warm.
Yeah.